The red-eyed shadow. The desert nights of Saudi Arabia carried whispers tales of jinn that slithered through the sands unseen but ever present. For young Amir, these were just his mother's stories meant to keep a curious child from wandering too far. But in the quiet of a Vancouver apartment years later, those whispers became a scream, a shadow with burning red eyes. It wasn't a dream. It was real, a malevolent force that pinned him down laughing at his fear. And when it moved to his brother's room, the truth of his mother's warnings clawed its way into his soul. The old brick bungalow in Saudi Arabia was a fortress of routine. Its sandy yard, a playground for Amir and his siblings. Being of Middle Eastern descent and growing up later in Western Canada, I remember faintly when we lived for a time in Saudi Arabia. The air was thick with heat, the sparse neighborhood a patchwork of homes for those tied to the royal family's wealth. When my dad was a contracted architectural engineer for a large American weapons company, where he designed and built foreign employee offices, living quarters, and buildings for the testing compounds in the harsh, sorty desert. His father's work with Raytheon brought them here a world of concrete and ambition carved from the desert. With other engineers from across the Middle East and Europe, the company that he worked for was none other than Rathon, a well-known merchant of death. The company's shadow loomed large, its dealings with the emir cloaked in luxury and power. That had dealings with the emir of the land who were swimming in black oil and luxury and were the Dayao government at the time. Amir was too young to grasp the weight of it all. I remember meeting some of them too, who were rather pleasant, and came with toys and candies for me and my siblings whenever they would come to our house to socialize and make their plans with my father. Their smiles were warm, their gifts sweet, but years later, the truth would chill him. Little did I know my father would tell me years later, in the comfort of our Vancouver apartment of course, that these men in their immaculate one-piece suits were quite ruthless businessmen, with killers and spies in their employ. They were power brokers, cousins and kin to the royals, orchestrating chaos across continents. We had hosted men who were cousins, uncles, and brothers to the sorty royals. They had toppled governments and raised up armies and militias, and even terrorist groups all across the Middle East and Africa. His father's colleague, a man with a quiet laugh, could craft destruction from household items. My dad had one colleague that could build a bomb from common items in your fridge and under your sink that could level a building, and that he learned this from intelligence agencies that will remain unnamed. The neighborhood was a bubble, insulated yet exposed. I remember our time there, an old brick bungalow house. We had lived in a large accommodation with a sandy yard. The houses stood apart, their silence a shield from prying ears. It was a sparse neighborhood. There were other houses, but not close enough to be in each other's business or hear your neighbor noises. Most residents served the royals their lives polished and privileged. Most of the people living in this area were in the employ of the royal family, in some capacity. They were well-off, educated, and well-connected. Empty houses dotted the area, their vacant windows tempting Amir's curiosity. There were several empty houses around as well that I would sometimes roam around and explore if I found the opportunity to escape the confines of our home. That is, his mother's stories shaped his world. Now, I had heard of the jinn early on from my mother as warnings against bad behavior, or when she wanted to scare me with images of beastly ghouls. Jinn were tricksters, shapeshifters lurking in shadows or dreams. She would say that they appeared in many forms, as shadows, humanoid chimera, like beings with hooved feet, and tails as transparent ghosts, or as invisible, unseen forces even. They could mimic loved ones, luring the unwary to ruin. She said that they could also appear as humans, and that there were great mimics. They could lure you into places with the voices of people that you knew. Sleep was their playground, a realm where they twisted thoughts. She would also say that they liked waiting until you slept, as they could enter your dreams for unknown reasons. Every oddity was there doing lost keys, strange noises. Many times, she would also ascribe any possibly paranormal or odd goings-on to the jinn, for example. If one heard unexplained noises from an empty room, or even if objects were lost, thoroughly looked for, then later found an area searched several times, that was them playing their tricks. Her rituals were a shield. She would often say a prayer against them, and or curse them either in the singular shaitan or in the plural shian. She forbade Amir from exploring the empty houses, their silence a trap for jinn. My mother would alert me against going to the abandoned or empty houses, for she warned me that these are the places that the jinn would occupy, waiting for wayward souls to attach to and torture. His father, ever practical, dismissed her tales. My father, being a rather pragmatic man, told me to never mind her stories, to just go and explore, but to be careful of strangers and not to be gone for too long. Yet her fear was real. Now she told me that once when I was 3 years old, I was sleeping in my room at night, and she had cause to check up on me after being washed over with a foreboding feeling, a creepy sensation that she needed to see that I was okay. A shadow loomed by his bed, its presence palpable. Upon entering my room, she said that there was a black shadow in the corner near my bed, that she saw it clearly for a split second, and not only saw, but also felt. Light banished it, but not her fear, and she flipped the light switch on, and it just dematerialized instantly. She stayed with him, then called a holy man. Being scared for her child, she spent several nights in my room with me before she brought a holy man to cleanse the space and say some prayers. Peace returned, or so she believed. After which she said that there were not any more occurrences of shadows looming over her children, and she seemed satisfied with that. Amir remembered little of those years. I don't recall ever seeing any moving shadows or ghouls in that part of my life. The desert faded, replaced by Vancouver's rain and bustle. But there was something later in my late teens, several occurrences of, what I can term as shadow people appearing. In British Columbia, life was vibrant, full of friends and freedom. We had moved to British Columbia by this time. Were awarded citizenship for some years. I was finishing high school, well-adjusted, lots of friends at school, and even in the building that we lived in. The apartment was a hub of laughter, kids roaming the streets. My 2 brothers and sister were friends with all the other kids and teens who also lived in our building and the neighboring apartments as well. Before phones and screens, they lived outside chasing adventure. This was in the early 2000s, before kids had cell phones, or even spend time on computers, really. We were always doing something outside in groups, having fun, and just causing a ruckus. In fact, I don't even think a day was spent inside, if we could help it. Their haunts were parks, alleys, endless summer days. We didn't need money or reason to just roam about at the very least, and more often than not, we had our regular haunts and meet-up spots. But one night changed everything. I remember one particular night, though I was maybe 16 or perhaps 18, where I had an experience that was quite jarring and was also shared with my brother. Amir woke, his body frozen, a weight on his chest. So I had been sleeping and woke up paralyzed, unable to move or speak. But to my horror, there was sitting in this chair beside my bed a shadow man with red eyes. The figure was solid shadow, its eyes glowing like embers radiating malice. His energy was malevolent and contemptuous. He didn't speak, just sat there. And even though I couldn't see a mouth, I knew that he was grinning. I could sort of see the outline of it. Its presence was a violation, savoring his fear. He was definitely a man, but just made of shadow that my eyes couldn't see through. He was watching me struggle to break my paralysis for what felt like 5 or 6 minutes. Time stretched, his red gaze unyielding. Obviously, I was terrified, and couldn't keep a straight thought in my head. But I was trying to somehow run away, even though it was impossible. I remember making mooing noises and moaning, trying to scream. But everything was paralyzed. Even though my mouth was agape and I couldn't shut it, I still couldn't scream. His muffled cries were futile, his body betraying him. I couldn't do anything but try to scream, and it was just coming out as muffled noises. The shadow's pleasure was palpable, feeding on his panic. In that moment, I could feel that this shadow being was deriving pleasure from my anguish. He was just sitting there, about 4T away from me, as clear as anything else in the dark room, just staring at me with those red eyes. Then, abruptly, it moved. Then all of a sudden, he stood up, belched out an evil chuckle, and zipped away in the direction of my brother's room down the hall. Its speed was unnatural, a blur of shadow and red trails. He flew in an alarming speed. Weirdly, too, I could see 2 trails of red light as his eyes left along with the shadow body. The paralysis snapped. At which point I snapped out of my paralysis as soon as he left my room. The paralysis had broke. Amir stumbled to the kitchen, his hands trembling. All I could focus on was his laugh before he left. And honestly, I thought that it was over, that this thing zipped away out of the apartment back to, well, wherever it is that it came from. He gulped water, trying to rationalize it as a dream. At that, I got out of bed and went to the kitchen to get a drink of water. The cold glass grounded him, but doubt lingered. I was shaken up, I'll admit, but I was convinced that this was just a weird, vivid dream of some sort. It felt too real, too vivid. It did feel real, as normal as life, in fact, as real as talking to another person. And I mean, I definitely seemed to be awake. I wasn't sleeping. Then a sound stopped him cold. But while I stood there, slowly drinking my cold water, I heard the same muffled screams that I was making coming from somewhere down the hall. The cries came from his brother's room. It was coming from the last room, my middle brother's room. Amir crept closer, dread pooling in his gut. I walked over there and listened by his door. And yes, he was making noises. The same stifled moans, desperate and trapped. So I opened his door, and I froze as I saw a portion of the air on top of him was darker than the already dark room. A shadow cloud hovered over Hassan, oppressive and alive. It was like a cloud was sort of hanging over him, and he looked sort of paralyzed like I was. And he was moaning exactly like I was too. His brother's face was contorted, silently screaming. I can only describe it as sort of silently screaming, but I ran over and shook him awake. Amir grabbed Hassan's shoulders, shaking hard. It took a few seconds, but I shook him hard, and eventually he came to. Hassan gasped, his eyes wild. He looked at me with eyes wide in fear and said that there was a shadow man with red eyes laughing at him while he made him frozen. The words mirrored Amir's terror. He said that he woke up paralyzed as this shadow man came into the room, and this thing was standing above him the whole time laughing and just watching him struggle. The shadow had tormented him, its laughter a blade. Honestly, I could barely believe it. I told him that it just happened to me too, and that I heard him from the kitchen. Amir recounted his own ordeal, the shadow's path from his room to Hassan's. I told him how it left my room and went in the direction of his room after it let me go. They sat shaken. The night endless, and both of us had trouble sleeping that night. It was the most surreal experience that I've ever had. Hassan was no believer in the paranormal. This was the first time any paralysis happened to him as well, and the first time anything like this event had ever happened. His pragmatism crumbled the shadow's reality undeniable. He wasn't into any paranormal stuff, and it was a shock to him that things like this could even happen. He'd scoffed at their mother's tales like their father. He never took my mother's story seriously. I suppose he was always just as level-headed and grounded as my father. Amir, open to the unknown, was still rattled. Unlike me, I did have an interest in these things, and UFOs, ghosts, and the such, but I also remember this as a shocking first time. It shattered his worldview. It was sort of an assault on my reality, even if I was open-minded to the paranormal. Their mother's reaction was immediate. In any case, we told our mom about it the next day, and she immediately blamed a jinn. The word jinn fell from her lips, heavy with memory. She was reminded of the time that she saw a shadowy presence in my room back in Saudi Arabia. The shadow by Amir's bed years ago echoed this night. We couldn't stop her from praying in our rooms and lighting her incense to clear the bad air. Her prayers were fervent, the incense thick, a ritual to banish evil, and it must have worked as well. I never felt that presence return. The shadow man didn't return, its red eyes gone. But it certainly wasn't the last time that I saw a shadow being. The years brought fleeting glimpses. It was never as blatant and in your face as the first time, but it happened many times more. Shadows darted in corners, vanished when lights flicked on. I've told this story to many people and shared it online even, and have never heard of a case where the shadow being attacked two people consecutively. The shared experience was unique, defying explanation. So was this just a case of sleep paralysis hallucinations? But how did me and my brother share this delusion, if that's truly what it was? Science offered no answers for their mirrored terror. To this day, we still talk about it. Hassan, now a skeptic, again still shudders at the memory. I had many other sleep paralysis encounters with shadow beings, but never like that first time. Amir's battles with paralysis continued, never as malevolent, and never again shared with another person. In fact, I get sleep paralysis quite often. Now even had it last night. The episodes were routine, a familiar weight. But I haven't had a shadow being during these times in 20 years or more. He'd learned to endure, to wait for release. I guess I've just become used to it now, waking up unable to move, and have learned to keep calm until it passes, which it always does in a minute or so. Yet the shadows persisted elsewhere. There were many other times I've seen the shadow people during waking hours, fleetingly in the peripherals of my vision darting by, as have others. I know friends saw them too, brief glimpses in dark rooms. Other times I've seen them when entering a dark room before turning a light on, after which they always disappear. But the red-eyed shadow was different. It wasn't a trick of the mind, not when Hassan saw it too, felt its malice. Was it a jinn, as their mother believed the stories of her childhood of beings that haunted dreams took root in Amir's mind? Had it followed them from Saudi Arabia or found them anew? He researched jinn, finding tales of entities that thrived on fear, their forms endless. One night, years later, he dreamed of the shadow man, its chuckle echoing, but woke free of paralysis. The apartment felt heavier after, as if the air remembered. Amir keeps a light on now. He shares the story, seeking others who've seen the red eyes, but finds no answers. Hassan avoids the topic, but his eyes betray the fear. Their mother's prayers hang in their rooms, a fragile shield. The shadows still watch, waiting for a moment of weakness, their laughter a whisper in the dark. The faceless man on the blue line. The night train was a world of its own, a metal cocoon rattling through the dark heart of Los Angeles. I was 19, maybe 20, riding the blue line home after a late shift, my headphones blasting to drown out the city's hum. The carriage was nearly empty, just me and a hooded figure a few seats ahead. I didn't think much of it, until he turned and the world stopped. His face wasn't there. No eyes, no mouth, just a void, black and endless, staring at me from beneath that hood. My breath caught my heart slamming against my ribs. He didn't move, didn't speak, but I felt him. Felt something ancient, something that wasn't human, watching me like it knew my every secret. Then he stepped off the train, and I was alone, trembling with a memory that's never left. I'd seen things before, shadows that lingered too long, presences that brushed past in empty rooms. I'd read about jinn beings from another world living lives parallel to ours. They could be kind, cruel, or just curious, slipping through the veil when it thinned. I'd grown used to them, their fleeting glimpses, their harmless pranks. But this was different. This wasn't a shadow, this was a warning. The blue line kept moving, the city lights streaking past, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd crossed a line. I'd studied jinn, learned their ways, how they shapeshift, how they favor certain places, but can appear anywhere. I'd thought I understood them, thought I could coexist. But that faceless man wasn't just passing through. He wanted me to see him, to know he was there. 20 years later, I still see him in my dreams, that void where a face should be. I've read everything I can about jinn, about their lives, their beliefs, their tricks. Some say they're spirits, others say they're something older, unbound by the rules of ghosts. But nothing explains that night, that moment when the veil didn't just thin, it tore open, and I saw what lies beyond. I'd always been sensitive to the unseen. I guess I just got used to them, I suppose. They seemed fairly harmless, fleeting shadows in the corners of my life. Eventually, I just stopped noticing them. After years of study, I figured that they were most likely jinn, living their own lives separated by a veil that sometimes grew thin. The veil that separates our lives from theirs can become thin, making them visible, their presence felt. I have learned that they have lives like we do, with families, duties, even faiths. Some are good and tolerant, others downright mean. Some are interested in pranks, others can grant boons or rarely possess. I have read that possessions are exceedingly rare. They have religions, can believe in God. Their forms fascinated me. Being shapeshifters, their most common form is a shadow in the shape of a human. Maybe because our minds can grasp them that way, or our eyes can only catch them in a certain visual frequency. They have their favorite dwellings, but can appear anywhere, not tethered like ghosts. I thought I'd learn to live with them, to respect their space until that night on the Blue Line. One night when I was maybe 19 or 20, I had an encounter on the Blue Line train in Los Angeles that still haunts me to this day. I was waitressing in downtown Long Beach, working the closing shift. I was on the train heading towards Los Angeles, just me and one other man. I had my headset on, minding my own business, and he was sitting in front of me with his hood up. Everything was fine until we reached Watts. The man got up, walked to the train doors, and as they opened, he turned back to look at me. He had no face, no features, just no eyes, no lips, no mouth, just pure blackness under the hood. He walked off the train, and I felt like my heart almost fell out of my body. The train lurched forward, but I was frozen. My headphones silent, the music drowned out by the pounding in my chest. Oh no. 20 years later, I'm still trying to figure out what I saw that day. Was it a jinn taking a form to unsettle me? Was it something else? Something my books hadn't prepared me for? I'd read about their tricks, their ability to mimic or deceive. But this felt deliberate, like a message I wasn't meant to understand. I never saw him again, but I feel him sometimes. In the quiet of a late-night walk, in the flicker of a streetlight. I've asked others, searched forums, read ancient texts, but no one's story matches mine. Has anyone else experienced anything like this? Or do you have any ideas as to what this could have been? I've lived with jinn my whole life, or so I thought. But that faceless man wasn't just living his life. He was showing me something, and I'm still afraid to know what. The Blue Line is still there, still carrying passengers through the night. I don't ride it anymore. Not if I can help it. But I wonder if he's still out there waiting at Watts, watching for someone else to look too closely. I've learned to live with the unseen, to let the shadows be. But that night taught me something else. Some things don't want to stay hidden. I don't fear the jinn anymore, not the way I used to. They're part of the world like us, moving through their own lives. But that man, that void, he wasn't just a jinn. If he was one at all, he was a reminder, a glimpse of something bigger, something that doesn't care if you believe. And I can't unsee it. Every late-night train, every hooded figure I pass brings it back. I tell myself I'm safe, that it was a one-time thing. But the truth is colder. He saw me, and I saw him. And somewhere in the dark, I think he's still watching, waiting for me to step back into his world. The midnight chase, the city's pulse thrummed in the dark, but something sinister stirred beneath it. On a moonless night, Katya, a 26-year-old Ukrainian immigrant, and her boyfriend Alex ventured into the underbelly of the city. Their mission was simple: a 45-minute drive to a European store for sunflower oil, a taste of home Katya craved. But the streets they navigated were far from welcoming. This wasn't just a trip for groceries, it was a descent into a nightmare. The air crackled with an unspoken warning, as if the city itself knew what was coming. And then the black car appeared. The headlights sliced through the night like a predator's gaze. Katya and Alex were on a 3-lane road, aiming for a U-turn lane. Traffic hummed around them, but the black sedan surged from the far right, cutting across lanes with reckless abandon. It swerved inches from their bumper, a shadow darting through the neon glow. The car blitzed through the middle lane to cut them off at the left lane. Katya's heart thudded. Alex gripped the wheel tighter. Was this a mistake or something deliberate? They stopped at the green light for the U-turn. Alex, calm but firm, gently honked twice, a polite nudge for the driver to move. The sedan lurched forward, but the tension didn't break. Every nerve in Katya's body screamed danger. They pulled into the parking lot on their right, the store's dim sign flickering ahead. But the black car didn't leave. It veered across 2 lanes, tires screeching, and mounted the sidewalk to follow them. The sedan rode nearly on their bumper, its horn blaring relentlessly. Katya's breath hitched as she glanced back. 3 silhouettes shot inside their intentions, masked by the tinted windows. Alex's jaw clenched. He stopped a few feet past the store instead of parking. The realization hit Katya like a slap. The car's dashcam wasn't recording. She tapped it, but it wouldn't turn on. It was disconnected. Panic clawed at Katya's chest. As Alex fumbled to plug the camera back in, the black car screeched to a halt beside them. The driver's window rolled down, revealing 3 young men, their eyes glinting with malice. The driver reached for something, his hand disappearing into the shadows of the car. Was it a weapon? Katya's scream shattered the silence. Just drive. Go. Just go. Alex slammed the gas tires, squealing as they tore through the lot. The black car roared to life, chasing them like a hound after prey. Katya's pulse thundered in her ears. This wasn't a game, it was a hunt. The parking lot became a battlefield. Alex began doing donuts, the car's engine roaring, as he spun in tight circles to shake their pursuers. Katya's screams echoed her hands, fumbling for her phone. "Call the police! I need to call the police!" she cried, dialing 911 with trembling fingers. The black car matched their every move, its headlights blinding in the rearview mirror. As Alex completed his last donut and sped out of the lot, Katya connected with an operator. Her voice cracked as she stammered. "We're being chased!" Alex shouted the street name. His years as an Uber driver giving him a mental map of the city. The black car was still on them, relentless. The chase spilled onto the city streets, a high-stakes game of cat and mouse. Katya's mind raced her past trauma with police flooding back 4 years ago. 2 officers had violated her trust, leaving scars that never healed. Yet here she was, clinging to the phone, begging for their help. The operator's calm voice anchored her a lifeline in the chaos. Alex weaved through traffic, his hands steady, despite the chaos. The black car's headlights loomed closer, then flickered as they neared the police station. The pursuers swerved onto a side street 3 blocks from the station, their taillights vanishing into the night. Katya's chest heaved. The call disconnected, but an officer called back, guiding them to safety. They pulled into the police station, the neon glow of the city replaced by the stark lights of the lot. Katya's hands shook as she recounted the ordeal. The officer, a kind man with a steady gaze, listened intently. He offered to escort them back to the store, his cruiser trailing their car like a guardian. At the store, Katya grabbed the sunflower oil she'd come for, her hands still trembling. As a small act of defiance against the night's terror, she insisted Alex try Slavic ice cream. He agreed it was better than American brands, a fleeting moment of normalcy. The officer inspecting the skid marks from Alex's donuts chuckled and said, "Nice moves." Back at the store, Katya's fear lingered, but so did her resolve. She'd faced her deepest fears, both of the chase and of the police, and come out stronger. Alex laughed about the Dodge's front-wheel donuts, but Katya's mind was elsewhere. What drove those men to chase them? Would they return? The officer completed his paperwork, and they thanked him before heading home. The city's pulse still thrummed, but Katya felt its rhythm differently now. She hoped she'd never see those 3 men again. But the night had changed her. She was no longer just a survivor of her past. She was a fighter. The drive home was quiet, the weight of the night settling over them. Katya stared out the window, the city's lights blurring into streaks. Every shadow seemed to hide a threat, every car a potential pursuer. Alex reached for her hand, his touch grounding her. They'd escaped, but the what-ifs gnawed at her. What if the dash cam had worked? What if Alex hadn't known the streets so well? What if she hadn't called 911, overcoming her fear of the police? The sunflower oil sat in the back seat, a small victory, but the ice cream's sweetness couldn't erase the bitterness of fear. At home, Katya curled up on the couch, her chest still tight. The memory of the black car's headlights burned in her mind. Alex, ever the optimist, tried to lighten the mood, joking about entering a stunt driving contest. But Katya's thoughts were darker. She wondered about the men in the car. Who were they? And why had they targeted them? The police had no answers, only assurances that they'd patrol the area. For Katya, it wasn't enough. She'd faced danger before, but this felt personal, as if the city itself had turned against them. The next morning, Katya woke to the smell of coffee and Alex's quiet humming. Life moved on, but the night's terror lingered like a bruise. She checked her phone, half expecting a news alert about the black car. Nothing. The world didn't care about their brush with danger, but Katya did. She vowed to be more vigilant, to trust her instincts. The sunflower oil sat on the counter, a reminder of what they'd risked. And though she'd never forget the chase, Katya knew one thing: she was stronger than her fear. The Blue Soldier's visitation. The clock struck midnight, and the house fell silent save for the faint hum of the world outside. I was sprawled on my couch, the glow of the TV casting flickering shadows across the room. Then a chill ran down my spine, as if the air itself had thickened with an unseen presence. My eyes darted to the hallway, where a faint blue glow pulsed at the corner. Was I imagining it? Or was someone watching me? Before I could blink, a figure stepped into view, bathed in shimmering light. I saw it up close and personal for a solid 5 to 6 seconds, which when you're seeing a ghost seems like an eternity. This wasn't a fleeting shadow or a trick of the light. I was laying on my couch at night when all of a sudden I see a spectral figure made of blue light emerge from around the corner of my hallway and start walking toward me. He was young, no older than his mid-20s, with sharp features that marked him as Asian. He was made of light, but he was also sort of transparent as well, so I could see through him. His military uniform, old perhaps, from a war long past, clung to his form, the fabric rippling as if caught in a breeze that didn't exist. He couldn't have been more than 10 to 15 feet away from me. My heart pounded not from fear, but from sheer awe. I was completely flawed, perplexed, amazed, shocked, all at the same time. The soldier's eyes, deep and sorrowful, locked onto mine. He was in such great detail that I could tell what type of clothing he was even wearing. Some type of military garment, and that he was young, an Asian male in his 20s. His expression was stoic, almost mournful, as if he carried a weight too heavy for the living to understand. He had a stoic, somber look on his face, almost sad, I would say. As he moved closer, he left a trail of undulating blue light behind him that kind of waved up and down like ripples on a pond, fading into the darkness. This lasted for a solid 5 or 6 seconds the entire time, my eyes completely wide open, and I can feel my heartbeat start to increase. Then, as he drew within arm's reach, he vanished into thin air as he got closer to me. The room returned to its quiet hum, but I was changed. I have never seen anything like it before in my life, and I seriously doubt that I ever will see anything like it ever again. I sat there, replaying the moment, trying to make sense of it. Had he been trying to tell me something? Why me? The house, an old rental with creaky floors and peeling paint, had never hinted at such secrets. Yet in those fleeting seconds, I felt a connection to something beyond the world I knew. The next morning, I scoured the house for clues. The hallway was ordinary, no scorch marks, no traces of blue light. I found an old photo album tucked away in the attic filled with grainy images of the house from decades past. One picture stopped me cold. A young soldier, strikingly similar to the figure I'd seen, stood in front of the house. The caption read, "Private Kwan, 1952. My hands trembled as I dug deeper, uncovering a newspaper clipping about a soldier who'd lived here briefly after a war, only to vanish without a trace. Was he bound to this place, replaying his final moments? I told my family about it, and they said, "You've always had a vivid imagination." But it was like, no, I know what I saw. There's no way what I saw wasn't real. Their skepticism stung, but I couldn't shake the truth. I've never believed in ghosts before, thinking that anyone who does has to be certified crazy. But after that night, I truly believe in ghosts and some sort of afterlife. Unlike the terror others describe for some weird reason, I didn't feel scared when I saw him, or even after. The dominant feeling that I had was just pure amazement and bewilderment to what I had just witnessed. But the story didn't end there. Weeks later, I began noticing odd things. Faint blue flickers in mirrors, a whisper of a foreign language in the dead of night. Was Kwan still here, or had he left something behind? I started researching the house's history, contacting local archives. The records revealed it had once been a boarding house for returning soldiers, many of whom carried scars, physical and otherwise. Kwan, I learned, had been a medic haunted by the lives he couldn't save. Had his spirit lingered seeking peace? Now every creak in the house makes me wonder. I've taken to leaving a small offering, a candle, a note by the hallway, hoping Kwan finds rest. Everyone always says that if or when you see a ghost, that it is scary. But that wasn't the case with me at all. His presence wasn't malevolent. It was a reminder that some souls linger, not to haunt, but to be remembered. And yet I can't help but ask, will he appear again? Whispers in the witching hour. The house stood silent under a starless sky, its peeling paint and sagging porch whispering secrets no one dared to hear. At 14, Riley lived in its shadowed embrace, a place that felt more like a cage than a home. The air inside was thick, heavy with something unseen, pressing against her skin each night she lay alone. So back in 2013 to 2000, I basically lived by myself. I was 14 at the time, but both parents were alcoholics. Her father was a ghost across town. Her mother lost to a boyfriend's arms, leaving Riley to face the darkness alone. And tonight, as the clock ticked toward 3 a.m., that darkness began to speak. The neighborhood was a maze of quiet streets, but the park down the road pulsed with reckless life. Riley and her friend Mandy had slipped out earlier, meeting boys under the flickering streetlights. Laughter and cheap soda cans littered the bleachers, but the thrill soured when Mandy vanished into the park bathroom, with some guy leaving Riley to fidget awkwardly beside her new boyfriend Alan. We were doing some hood rat stuff. We were at our neighborhood park, hanging out with my boyfriend at the time, Alan, and some dude that she wanted to hook up with. The night dragged on, and by the time they started the long walk back, the world felt too still, too watchful. Something followed them unseen, its presence prickling the back of Riley's neck. They reached the house at 3 a.m., the hour when the world holds its breath. The screen door groaned as Riley triple-checked the locks, a ritual born of fear. We didn't get there until about 3:00 a.m. Inside, the hardwood floors gleamed faintly in the moonlight, cold and unforgiving. Riley's brother, a night shift nurse, was gone, his room a temporary haven for the girls. But as they collapsed onto his bed, the air shifted, growing dense, like a storm about to break. A sound, soft, deliberate, cut through the silence, not from the house, but from something within it. It started as a whisper so faint, Riley thought she'd imagined it. Her name, spoken in a voice that wasn't Mandy's, slithered through the dark. I heard a whisper. Something. I looked over at her and said, "What?" And her eyes were wide. Mandy's face paled, her voice trembling as she swore she hadn't spoken. Swore she'd heard Riley whisper in her ear. The room seemed to shrink, the walls leaning in, listening. Riley laughed, a nervous reflex, but the sound died in her throat as the whisper came again, closer, curling around her like smoke. Mandy bolted upright, clutching her phone, her voice shaking as she insisted they move rooms. She jumped up and grabbed her charger and her phone and started saying that she was really scared by that. They stumbled across the hall to Riley's mom's room, hearts pounding, the darkness chasing them. But the house wasn't done with them yet, as Mandy dialed a friend, spilling her fear in frantic words. A new sound froze them both, a heavy, deliberate tread like work boots on the hardwood floor. The footsteps began at the far end of the hallway, each one a hammer against Riley's chest. We suddenly hear footsteps that sounded like heavy work boots, and we had hardwood floors in that house, so you could definitely hear it more pronounced. They grew louder, closer, stopping just outside the door. Riley's mind raced, grasping for logic, her brother maybe in his boots, but a glance through the blinds showed an empty driveway. No car in sight. The silence that followed was worse, thick with the promise of something waiting, watching. 2 more steps echoed, as if whatever it was had turned toward her brother's room, then stopped. Riley gripped Mandy's hand, whispering they should call 911. But doubt crept in. I had triple-checked the back door and the front door to make sure that they were locked, all the windows, and the screen door as well. Every entrance was secure. The metal screen door's loose panel silent all night. No one could have gotten in. The realization hit like ice water. Whatever was in the house didn't need doors. The girls sat paralyzed, waiting for the door to burst open for the thing to reveal itself. Minutes stretched into eternity, the silence a predator stalking them. Courage or desperation finally drove them to check the house. We got the courage to go out and look, and when we did, nothing was out of the ordinary, and every door and window was definitely locked. The hallway was empty, the rooms untouched, but the air felt wrong, charged with a presence that lingered. Riley's laughter from earlier was gone, replaced by a bone-deep dread she couldn't shake. Mandy's eyes were haunted, her refusal to return to the house a silent vow, never to face that fear again. But the house wasn't finished with Riley. Nights after, alone in the dark, she'd hear it again. Not footsteps, but scratches, faint and deliberate from the attic above. The sound was too precise, too intentional to be rats or wind. She began to notice things, her keys misplaced, a glass left on the counter she swore she'd washed. The house was alive, its pulse hidden in the creak of the floors, the flicker of lights that dimmed without reason. Riley started sleeping with a knife under her pillow, not that it would help against something that didn't bleed. Weeks later, a neighbor mentioned the house's history, a family who'd lived there decades ago. A tragedy no one liked to talk about. The details were vague, but the word disappearance hung in the air like a curse. Riley's brother, when he was home, dismissed her fears. But even he avoided the attic, his boots never making the same heavy sound she'd heard that night. The whispers never returned, but the feeling of being watched never left. Riley moved out a year later, but the house stayed with her, a shadow in her dreams, its secrets locked behind a door she'd never open again. Midnight escaped the chase. The night was a trap, and we were the prey. The air hung heavy with frost, each breath a puff of white in the dim streetlights. At 16, we were invincible, or so we thought. The apartment complex sprawled like a maze, its shadowed corners hiding secrets we weren't ready to uncover. Claire and I had slipped out of my house, hearts racing with the thrill of rebellion. The plan was foolproof: meet some guy's laugh dance and be back before my parents stirred. We grabbed our phones and started walking toward the entrance, the cold biting at our skin. But the night had other plans. We stood at the edge of betrayal. The guys we'd trusted, all charm and promises, turned their backs. Too drunk they slurred, or too high their eyes glassy and distant. No ride home. My house was a 20-minute drive down a desolate highway. Walking was out of the question. Claire's jaw tightened, her gaze slicing through the smoky room. "We're out of here," she said, her voice ablade. A car rolled slowly behind us, its headlights casting long, creeping shadows. The hum of its engine was a warning I didn't yet understand. I was naive, but Claire wasn't. She grabbed my wrist, her grip iron. "Walk faster," she urged, her voice low. The car's pace quickened, mirroring ours. My pulse surged, a drumbeat of fear. We sped up, but the car surged forward, cutting slightly ahead. Headlights pinned us like prey. Claire's eyes flicked to the shadows, calculating. The passenger doors swung wide, and two men emerged, their steps deliberate. Their silhouettes loomed tall and predatory. Claire barked, and we tore into the night. The chase was on. We sprinted toward a cluster of parked cars, gravel crunching underfoot. We dove behind a pickup truck, crouching low, praying we hadn't been seen. My lungs burned, but Claire's focus was unshakable. This was no game. This was survival. Footsteps followed, slow, deliberate, closer. One of them was searching for us, his boots scuffing the pavement. Claire pressed a finger to her lips, her breath barely audible. We edged around the truck's far side, silent, mirroring his movements. It felt like a scene from a movie, heart-pounding and unreal, as we circled 2-3 times without being spotted. A miracle he gave up returning to the car. But safety was a lie. The engine roared again, headlights sweeping the lot. Claire's hand found mine, steadying my trembling fingers. We weren't out yet. The cold clawed at us, our outfits. Short shorts, flimsy tops, useless against the winter's bite. Claire whispered, "Done again." We bolted, legs screaming toward the pool house, its dark bulk our only hope. We slipped behind fences and bushes, hearts hammering, waiting to see if we'd been followed. The car prowled closer, its lights grazing our hiding spot. It circled the complex for hours, relentless, refusing to let us go. The pool house was a fragile fortress. We crouched low, the wooden fence splintering against our backs. The bushes offered little cover, their bare branches rattling in the wind. The men kept circling, their headlights slicing through the dark. Each pass felt like a noose tightening. Claire's eyes never left the road, her mind racing. "We need a plan," she whispered. My teeth chattered, the cold sinking deeper. We made calls, desperate for rescue, but no one answered. The guys from the party, our so-called friends, were ghosts now. We felt alone, hopeless, the weight of our mistake crushing us. The blanket we'd found, a dirty Captain America blanket reeking of neglect, was our only shield. Its faded stars mocked our predicament, but we clung to it, sharing its meager warmth. My phone's battery was dying, each unanswered call a stab of despair. Claire dialed again, her voice steady despite the odds. "Someone will pick up." She said more to herself than me. I wanted to believe her, but the night was cruel. The complex was a labyrinth, its identical buildings disorienting. We couldn't stay here forever, the cold would claim us if the men didn't. Claire's mind turned to strategy. We played detective, asking about nearby buildings' dumpsters, anything to pinpoint their location. She called our last hope, a friend who might still be awake. "Describe where you are," she instructed over the phone. "Any landmarks, a sign." Her calm was infectious, pulling me from panic. Hours dragged, each minute an eternity. The car circled the complex for hours, relentless, refusing to let us go. Its engine was a taunt, daring us to move. Claire tracked its pattern, counting the seconds between passes. "They're slowing down," she noted. Hope flickered, fragile, but real. At 5 a.m., a call connected. Our friend couldn't find the pool house, and we couldn't risk leaving our hiding spot. "You're close, Claire," Claire said into the phone. "Look for a red dumpster." Her voice was firm, guiding our savior to us. Relief was a lifeline, but danger lingered. The car's headlights flashed again, closer now. Claire squeezed my hand. "We're getting out," she vowed. The blanket slipped from our shoulders as we prepared to run. We spotted our friend's car, dove inside, and yelled, "Go!" The engine roared, tires screeching as we sped toward the exit. We passed the group of men, their faces a fleeting shadow in the dawn. My heart pounded, but we were free. The car tore through the complex streetlights, blurring into streaks. We made it home by 6 a.m., sneaking in before my parents noticed. The house was still unaware of the nightmare we'd survived. I collapsed onto my bed, the blanket stench clinging to my skin. Claire sat beside me, her silence heavy. Without Claire, I might have been abducted, assaulted, or worse. Her instincts had saved us, her courage, a beacon in the dark. The friend who picked us up was a lifeline we'll never forget. But the night wasn't done with us. Fear lingered, a shadow in every corner. I saw those men in my dreams, their silhouettes, their deliberate steps. Claire and I never spoke of it to others, but it bound us. We washed that Captain America blanket and shared it for years, a trophy of our survival. It became a relic, a reminder of what we'd outrun. We'd been reckless, but we'd grown. The apartment complex became a forbidden memory. We avoided it, its maze of buildings a trigger for panic. The guys from the party faded into obscurity, their betrayal a lesson in trust. The friend who picked us up was a lifeline we'll never forget. He never asked questions, his silence a gift. We owed him everything, but words felt too small. Life moved on, but the cold stayed with us. I walked differently now, scanning every shadow, every stranger. Claire did too, her eyes sharper, her steps surer. We washed that Captain America blanket and shared it for years, a trophy of our survival. It lived in our closets, a quiet testament to our resilience. We traded it back and forth, a ritual of remembrance. The night reshaped us. We were kids, but we emerged something stronger. Without Claire, I might have been abducted, assaulted, or worse. Her voice, her grip, her plan, they were my salvation. The blanket was our proof. Its faded stars, a symbol of survival. We danced with danger and walked away scarred, but unbroken, forever marked by the night we outran the dark. The aftermath was quiet, but profound. Claire and I grew closer, our bond forged in fear. The blanket became a pact, a vow to never be so reckless again. We didn't need to speak of it. Our shared glances said enough. We made it home by 6 a.m., sneaking in before my parents noticed. My room felt foreign, too safe, too still. Sleep came fitfully haunted by headlights and footsteps. The complex was erased from our lives. We found new places to laugh, to live, but never with the same abandon. Trust was harder now, earned through actions, not words. The friend who picked us up was a lifeline we'll never forget. His car, his silence, his speed, they were our escape. We never saw the men again, but their shadows lingered, a warning in every dark corner. The blanket was our anchor. We washed that Captain America blanket and shared it for years, a trophy of our survival. It moved between our homes, a reminder of what we'd endured. Its stench faded, but its weight remained. We'd been naive, but we'd learned. Without Claire, I might have been abducted, assaulted, or worse. Her clarity, her courage, they were my shield. Now I walk with eyes wide open. Every stranger, every bore, every shadow, I see them all. Claire does too, her instincts honed by that night. We're not the girls who snuck out, not anymore. The blanket stays a relic of survival, its stars faded, but unbroken. We were kids, but we emerged wiser, stronger, forever marked by the night we outran the dark. The scratching in the dark. The house on Tyndall Air Force Base was never quiet. Beneath its aging walls, something stirred, something that didn't belong. Mark and Lena, a young couple stationed in Florida, thought they'd found a home. But the townhouse built on land, whispered to hold ancient burial mounds, had other plans. Each night the air grew heavier, as if the past was clawing its way into the present. And then the scratching began. It started in the closet, a faint, deliberate scrape. Mark and Lena were lying in bed, the room swallowed by darkness so thick it felt alive. The sound was soft at first, like nails dragging across wood. They heard scratching coming from the closet by the foot of the bed. Lena's breath caught. Mark froze, his pulse hammering. Was it a rat, a branch against the house? They got quiet and listened. The noise wasn't random, it had purpose. The scratching grew bolder, closer. The sound started getting closer. Scratching on the walls. It moved with eerie precision, circling the room like a predator sizing up its prey. Lena clutched the blanket, her mind racing to the stories of the burial mounds. It softly rattled the blinds on the window next to Mark's side of the bed. The air felt charged, as if something unseen was watching. Mark whispered, "It's nothing," but his voice trembled. They were wrong. Fear rooted them to the bed. They tried to ignore it. Mark buried his face in the pillow, willing sleep to come. But the house wouldn't let them escape. A few minutes went by, and the silence was worse than the noise. Then it happened. Something landed on the back of Mark's neck. A jolt of terror shot through him. He freaked out, did a smash grab and throw of whatever was on his neck, and bolted for the light switch. The room flooded with light, revealing the truth. It was a cockroach the size of Mark's palm. But this was no ordinary insect. Its shell gleamed unnaturally, its legs twitching as if still reaching for him. Lena screamed, her eyes darting to the closet. The only exposed piece of skin Mark had was his neck, too perfect, too precise. Was it a coincidence or something more? The burial mounds, the stories of restless spirits loomed in their minds. This house wasn't theirs, it never had been. The light did little to banish the dread. Mark swept the cockroach into a corner, but its presence lingered like a curse. The closet door, slightly ajar, seemed to pulse with a life of its own. Lena refused to sleep, her eyes fixed on the shadows. They'd heard the rumors excavations on the base had disturbed sacred ground. The scratching wasn't just a sound, it was a message. Something wanted them to know it was there. Mark tried to rationalize it. Maybe the house was old, its walls hiding pests or shifting beams. But the precision of the cockroach's landing gnawed at him. He remembered the base's history artifacts, unearthed bones relocated. Lena, trembling, spoke of her grandmother's tales. Spirits could manipulate the living world using creatures as vessels. The cockroach wasn't just a bug, it was a warning. They searched the closet, finding nothing but clothes and dust. Yet the air felt wrong, heavy with intent. Sleep was impossible. Every creak, every gust outside felt like the house conspiring against them. They considered leaving, but the lease bound them, and the base offered no other housing. The next night, the scratching returned, now joined by a faint whisper, like a voice too soft to decipher. Lena recorded it on her phone, but the audio was static. The house was toying with them, and they were running out of courage. Days turned to weeks, and the house grew bolder. Objects moved, keys on the counter one moment, in the closet the next. Lena saw shadows flit across mirrors, always gone when she turned. Mark, once skeptical, began to believe. They contacted a local historian, who confirmed the burial mounds were real, their spirits possibly angered by the base's construction. A cleansing ritual was suggested, but the couple hesitated. What if it made things worse? One night, the scratching stopped. The silence was deafening, a trap waiting to spring. Lena and Mark lay awake, braced for the worst. Then the closet door creaked open on its own. A cold draft swept through, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Lena whispered a prayer from her childhood, her voice shaking. Mark grabbed a flashlight, its beam trembling as it swept the room. Nothing. But they knew better. The house was alive, and it wasn't done with them. They moved out a month later, breaking their lease. The new tenants reported nothing unusual, but Mark and Lena never returned. The cockroach, the scratching, and the whispers, they carried those memories like scars. The burial mounds remained silent, but watching. Lena sometimes wondered if the spirits had followed them, waiting for another chance. One thing was certain, some houses aren't meant to be homes. The screaming phantom of Holston River. The night was heavy with the scent of pine and river mist, wrapping our campsite in an eerie quiet. I swayed gently in my hammock, the South Holston River gurgling softly nearby. Then a prickle of unease crawled up my neck, as if the forest itself held its breath. The stars above flickered, dimming for a moment, and the air turned sharp cold. Was something out there watching us from the shadows? Before I could dismiss it as fatigue, a sound tore through the silence, a scream so raw it shook my bones. This happened to me probably about 6 years ago now. To set the scene too, I was camping with about 5 other friends along the South Holston River in the Appalachian Mountains of East Tennessee. We'd set up camp in a clearing, my friend Jake and I in hammocks, while the others, Lila, Mark, Sarah, and Tom, split between 2 tents about 15 feet away. It was probably around 2:00 in the morning when this happened, me and one of my friends. We slept in a couple of hammocks, while the rest of the group was split up into a couple of tents that were maybe 19 feet away. I was the only one still awake, teetering on the edge of sleep when it hit. I was the only one awake at that time, but I was just about to fall asleep when suddenly I hear this insane noise. It sounded like a man letting out a loud, deep scream at the top of his lungs, as if he was in pain. At first, it sounded about 20 feet away, but I heard it move extremely quickly through the middle of the campsite, right between where I was sleeping and where my friends in the tents were. It was no ordinary sound. It surged primal and anguished, slicing through the night like a blade. It was just a few feet from me as it went by. The scream seemed to have a physical weight pressing against my chest as it passed. Once I passed through the camp, the noise just stopped. It only lasted maybe 3 to 4 seconds. But what chilled me most was the silence that followed. No rustle of leaves, no snap of twigs. Also, despite the fact that whatever making the noise was clearly moving through the camp very quickly, there was no sound of like hurried footsteps, leaves crunching, or anything like that to indicate that something was actually there moving. It was really only the sound of screaming. Whatever it was, it woke everyone up, and we were all pretty terrified, having no idea what it was. The others stumbled out of their tents, faces, pale eyes wide with fear. Lila clutched her flashlight, sweeping it across the trees, but the beam revealed nothing but swaying branches. We all got up at this point and looked around camp, but there was no sign of anything passing through. The ground was undisturbed, no footprints, no trampled grass. We thought that maybe it was a type of bird, since there were no footsteps. But none of us have been able to find any bird from the area that makes anywhere near the sound that we heard that night. Mark suggested a screech owl, but we pulled up recordings on Tom's phone. Our first theory was a screeching owl, but we looked up what their calls sound like, and it definitely wasn't one of those. The owl's cry was shrill, almost metallic, not the deep human-like wail we'd heard. We all agreed that it sounded like a man, but it was way too fast for a person. Could it have been an animal? We thought maybe something like a deer, a bear, or a mountain lion. But we would have undoubtedly heard some footsteps if it was. A deer would have crashed through the underbrush. A bear would have left tracks. A mountain lion. Maybe, but its scream is more like a woman's cry, not a man's. We're completely out of theories at this point, and we have no idea what to think about it. We sat around the dying fire trading shaky theories, but none stuck. Had we stumbled into something ancient? Something the forest didn't want us to hear. The next morning, we packed up at dawn, too unnerved to stay another night. But the scream lingered in my mind, and I couldn't let it go. Back home, I dug into local history, scouring forums and old books about the Appalachian Mountains. The South Holston River, it turned out, had stories. Whispers of a Civil War skirmish nearby, where soldiers fled into the woods never to return. Some locals spoke of a wailer, a spirit doomed to relive its final moments, its scream echoing through the ages. Was that what we'd heard, a soldier's cry trapped in time? Months later, I found a journal in a secondhand bookstore written by a ranger who'd worked the area in the 1920s. His entries described a night much like ours, a scream that moved without footsteps waking his camp. He called it the Holston Wraith, a presence tied to the river's bend, where we'd camped. The ranger believed it was no ghost, but something older born of the land itself. His words sent a shiver through me. Had we brushed against something beyond death? Something the forest guarded? Now every rustle in the dark makes me pause. I've never gone camping since, and neither have the others. We still text about that night, trying to make sense of it, but the truth feels just out of reach. Does anyone have any thoughts on what could possibly explain what we heard? I've stopped looking for answers in biology or logic. Maybe the mountains hold secrets we're not meant to understand, and that scream was a warning to leave them be. Echoes from an empty house. The house was never quiet. Not truly. Its walls groaned under the weight of something unseen, something that listened when no one else did. At 16, Emma navigated its creaking halls alone most days, her cheerleading practice the only anchor to a world outside. It all happened when I was in high school, so about 6 years ago. Her father, a man worn thin by long hours, shared the house but not its secrets. Tonight, as the sky darkened and the garage door rattled shut, the house began to play its cruelest trick yet. The air inside was stale heavy with the scent of old wood and forgotten promises. Emma's father, Tom, arrived home first, his work boots scuffing the linoleum. He recalls doing as he normally would when he got home. Usually this entails going out to our first-floor bathroom. The silence was familiar, broken only by the hum of the fridge, until it wasn't. A sound sharp and deliberate cut through the stillness. The garage door opening, keys, jangling footsteps, darting up the stairs. Emma, he thought home from practice, but the driveway was empty, her car nowhere in sight. Tom froze his hand on the bathroom door as the house replayed her routine with eerie precision. He heard me come through the garage door, drop my keys off, unload my lunchbox, and grab a snack. The stairs creaked each step, a mimicry of Emma's hurried stride, ending with the faint click of her bedroom door. His voice, unsteady, called up to her, expecting her usual muffled reply from behind the door. He called up to me. "My bedroom is right by the stairs. Got practice later?" he asked, and her voice answered, clear and calm. "I do not." But then the garage door groaned again, and Emma stepped inside her real presence, a shock against the lie. I suddenly walked in behind through the garage door. Tom's face drained of color, his eyes darting to the stairs where he'd just heard her. The bedroom door stood open, the room empty. No trace of the girl he'd spoken to moments before. Emma, confused by his panic, followed him upstairs, her heart pounding as he recounted the impossible conversation. The house felt alive, its walls pulsing with a presence that mocked them both. Weeks later, the roles reversed. Emma was home alone, sprawled on her bed. The house is quiet, a fragile shield against her fear of intruders. I was the first one home, and heard him come through the garage door and go straight to the bathroom. The familiar sounds of her father's arrival keys, boots the bathroom door unfolded below. She called out, "Hey, Dad," and heard his gruff hello in return, as if he were settling in. But then the garage door opened again, a sound that didn't belong, and the house fell silent. Emma's breath caught as she crossed to her desk, peering out the window. I found his car not in the driveway, which was odd. The street was empty, no sign of her father's work van or any vehicle. Her phone buzzed with a text from him. Not home yet. Almost there. The realization hit like a cold wave she'd spoken to someone or something that wasn't him. The stairs, the door, the voice, all perfectly mimicked yet impossibly wrong. She checked the security app. The cameras confirming the garage door hadn't opened since she'd arrived. The house seemed to tighten around her, its shadows sharper, its silence heavier. We had a garage door app at that time, and have multiple security cameras, which I checked. No one had approached the property. No intruder could have entered. Emma's fear of break-ins, a lifelong shadow, crumbled against this new terror, something that didn't need to break in, because it was already there. When her father arrived, she recounted the incident, her voice trembling as their stories aligned. The house had played them both, weaving their voices into its own deceptive game. They searched for answers, but the house offered none. The cameras showed nothing. The locks were untouched, yet the incidents left scars. Emma began to notice details she'd ignored. A glass moved from the sink, a door left ajar. She swore she'd closed. Her father, practical to a fault, dismissed it as stress, but even he avoided lingering in the house alone. A neighbor's offhand comment about the previous owners, whispers of a family who'd left, suddenly hung in the air unanswered. The voices never returned, but the feeling of being watched never left. Emma moved out after high school, the house a memory she buried deep. But sometimes, in the quiet of a new place, she'd hear it, a faint echo of her own voice calling from a room she knew was empty. The house had marked her its game of echoes, a reminder that some doors once opened never truly close. She wondered if it still waited, mimicking new voices for new tenants, its walls alive with the ghosts of those it had fooled, and somewhere in the creak of its stairs, it whispered her name, patient for her return. Stranger at the edge, a neighbor's shadow. A stranger's shadow can shatter your world. The late afternoon sun dipped low, painting my quiet street in gold and gray. At 25, I lived for the small moments, brushing my husky's fur in the driveway, his soft whines my only company. I'm standing in my front driveway brushing my dog when I turn around to see a complete stranger, a grown man standing behind me. My heart lurched. He was too close, his boots silent on the pavement. He begins by asking me if he can say hi to my dog, because he's seen me around a lot. His voice was smooth, but his eyes were side cutting through the calm. I hesitated, but allowed it. My husky wagged his tail, clueless, but unease coiled in my gut. At this time, I noticed that he's on FaceTime with his phone pointing at me. Me too. The screen's glow showed a faceless watcher, their presence a violation. He tells me that he just moved here from South Africa and bought the house at the end of the road that's been abandoned for like over a year now and was never posted for sale. That house was a ruin, broken glass, choked with weeds, a ghost of a home. His claim rang hollow. He starts asking me if I'm 16 because he likes 16-year-olds. The words hit like a slap, my skin crawling. He follows up with, "Are you alone right now? Is this your house? Is this your car? Do you live alone? Are you around often?" Each question tightened the air, his tone too hungry, too bold. I politely say that I'm not willing to answer questions like that, and tell him that he should leave. He stood rooted, his gaze a weight I couldn't shake. He then walks into the woods across the street. The trees swallowed him, their shadows deep and cold. My husky pressed against me, sensing my fear. 15 minutes later, he emerged, his stride purposeful. He comes back, attempting to invite himself into my house and asking more questions, this time along the lines of, "Do you lock your doors? Are you alone at nighttime?" His voice hardened, irritation flashing. He's getting upset with me for saying that I do not want him on my property. I tell him I would be calling our cop neighbor to come outside if he didn't leave me alone. My voice held firm, but my hands trembled. He stepped back, his eyes cold, unblinking. He stood in the street watching me walk into the house and lock up, before walking away back to that abandoned house. The door's lock clicked, a fragile barrier. Now I'm just left thinking if I'm overreacting or if being totally creeped out is the correct response. The house felt like a cage. I've put in a report and spoken to a couple of neighbors, but none of them have seen him around. Their blank stares only deepened my dread. I guess it's good, but I'm wondering if I should be a bit more concerned. The abandoned house loomed in my thoughts, its empty windows watching. This is the first time that anything like this has ever happened to me. My husky paced his fur, brushing my legs, a quiet anchor in the storm. Night fell, and every sound was a threat. I checked the locks 3 times, my phone clutched tight with my neighbor's number on speed dial. The stranger's questions echoed. "Do you lock your doors? Are you alone at nighttime?" Each one a seed of fear. I called my friend Sarah, her voice a lifeline. "You're not crazy," she said. "Trust your instincts." Her words steadied me, but the unease lingered, a shadow I couldn't outrun. I stopped brushing my husky in the driveway, keeping our walks short away from the woods. The abandoned house stood silent, but I felt its pull as if it held answers or threats. I asked my neighbor, the cop, to drive by it. He found nothing. No signs of life. No trace of the man. Yet I felt his eyes somewhere watching. My routines shifted different times. Different paths. My car locked even steps from my door. My husky became my sentinel, his ears twitching at every rustle. I bought a security camera, its red light a small comfort. Sarah came over her presence, easing the tension. We laughed, but it was hollow, the stranger's face flashing in my mind. I reported him again, detailing his FaceTime, his questions, his return from the woods. The police promised to patrol, but the abandoned house stayed empty, a riddle unsolved. I wasn't the same. The quiet street I loved felt tainted, its peace stolen. I'm wondering if I should be a bit more concerned. My husky's loyalty, Sarah's support, my neighbor's vigilance, they held me together. That man, whoever he was, had shaken my world, but I wouldn't let him break it. I stood taller, eyes sharp, ready for whatever came next. My home, a fortress, my resolve unbroken. The shadow in the trees. The Irish countryside held its breath at night. Beyond the scattered houses and sprawling farms, the darkness was a living thing, watching, waiting. Saoirse, a young woman newly settled in North Dublin's rural fringe, loved her evening runs. But the narrow, crumbling road she tread was no place for the unwary. Last night, under a starless sky, she met something that wasn't human, and now she might never run again. The road was a patchwork of shadows. Saoirse went on her daily 2-kilometer run, her sneakers pounding the worn pavement. Usually she ran at dusk, but last night studies delayed her. She went out at around 9 p.m., the world cloaked in black. Houses glowed faintly on her left field stretched to her right, but the abandoned buildings and dense tree patches felt like eyes boring into her. The area with the patch of trees was pitch black, the streetlights flickering uselessly. She clutched her flashlight, its beam a frail shield. Music drowned out the world. Saoirse listened to music on her run, volume all the way up. A show tune from West Side Story blared her rhythm steady, despite the creeping unease. The trees loomed closer, their branches clawing at the sky. The lights flickered back on, casting jagged shadows. Then she saw it. There was a figure standing around 30 meters away, 20 meters from the road in the trees. It didn't move, didn't breathe, just stood a silhouette carved from the dark. Her heart stuttered. Saoirse thought she was seeing things, but the figure was undeniable. Tall, unnaturally still, its edges blurred like smoke. Was it a person, a trick of the light? She kept running, her pace quickening. Fear pricked her skin, urging her to act. She turned down the volume of the music to hear if the figure moved. The silence was worse, thick, oppressive, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. She sped up past the figure, her flashlight bobbing wildly. The figure lingered in her mind. Saoirse didn't turn up her music, her senses on high alert. She was 100 meters past the trees now. Her breath ragged. She tried to process what had just happened. Maybe it was nothing, a shadow playing tricks. But her gut screamed otherwise. The road stretched on empty, but she felt watched. She had to walk back the 2 km distance. The thought of passing those trees again twisted her stomach. She steeled herself, turning back, flashlight in hand. The lights were flickering, but almost staying on as Saoirse approached the tree patch again. The air felt heavier, charged with something she couldn't name. She tried to observe the spot where the figure was standing, sweeping her flashlight across the undergrowth. Nothing, just branches and shadows. She turned off the music, her ears straining for any sound. The flickering lights cast a strobe-like effect, disorienting her. She started to run past that spot, her pulse hammering. Then it happened. A man jumped across the street right in front of her. It was the same figure, tall, gaunt, his face hidden in shadow. Saoirse came to a halt, her breath catching. His movements were wrong, too fluid, too fast. He started moving his steps, silent, but deliberate. Panic surged. Sayarche turned around and started running as fast as she could, her legs burning. She screamed for help, literally screaming as loud as she could. The figure didn't speak, didn't chase, just watched its presence, a weight on her back. She passed the trees and reached the area with houses. Her screams echoed, raw and desperate. Someone heard her and came out asking if everything was okay. Saoirse stopped gasping, her eyes darting to the trees. The guy, whoever he was gone. The man, a middle-aged neighbor with a kind face, listened as she stammered her story. She explained everything, her voice shaking. The neighbor's concern was genuine, his presence a lifeline. She asked for a lift, too terrified to walk alone. The stranger escorted her back home, his car's headlights cutting through the dark. Saoirse's hands trembled as she unlocked her door. She locked all the doors and checked everything to make sure she was safe. Her parents were at a friend's house, leaving her alone. She didn't tell them anything to avoid worrying them. The house felt too quiet, every creak a threat. Saoirse hasn't gone out for a run since her fear a heavy chain. What was that figure, and would it come back? Alone in her room, Saoirse replayed the night. The figure's stillness haunted her, less human, more like a specter born of the land. She researched local legends, finding tales of spirits tied to Ireland's ancient fields. Some said the rural roads were paths for the restless beings that lingered where the living tread. The abandoned building near the trees, was it a marker, a forgotten grave? Her flashlight hadn't caught the figure's face, but its presence felt personal, as if it knew her. The next day, she spoke to the neighbor again. He'd heard whispers of strange sightings, figures in the trees always at night. No one spoke openly, but the fear was there, shared in hushed tones. Saoirse considered moving back to Galway, where the city's hum drowned out such terrors. But the countryside had its claws in her. She stopped running, trading her routine for safety. The road once her escape was now a gauntlet she couldn't face. Weeks later, a farmer mentioned an old story, a wanderer who vanished in those woods, his spirit bound to the trees. Saoirse shivered, picturing the figure's silent gaze. She installed motion lights outside her house, their harsh glow a feeble defense. The countryside was no longer peaceful, it was alive, watching. Saoirse hoped nothing else would happen, but she kept her ears open, knowing the shadow might return. Some roads, she learned, were never meant to be run alone. The whispering lure of the fence line. The night was unnervingly still, the kind of quiet that makes your skin crawl. I stood in my backyard, the chain-link fence glinting faintly under the dim glow of a single porch light. Beyond the fence, the woods loomed their shadows, swallowing the edges of my suburban Atlanta neighborhood. My dog Luna sniffed the grass, oblivious to the tightening knot in my stomach. Then a soft sound, a whisper slipped from the darkness, and I froze. It wasn't the wind or an animal. It was a voice, and it knew my name. Everyone that I've talked to about my experience doesn't really believe in the paranormal, so they've all just sort of brushed it off. But I couldn't dismiss what happened. A 25-year-old female live alone in the suburbs of Atlanta. It was just after 9:30 p.m. when I stepped outside with Luna. Last night at around 9:30 p.m., I took my dog outside in my backyard. The air was heavy. The neighboring houses dark, their windows like empty eyes. For context, I have a large chain-linked fence in my backyard that has taller grass or shrubbery close to the fence line. The wooded area beyond, pressed against the fence, a tangle of vines and shadows. My backyard is both surrounded by other houses as well as a wooded area. I lingered near the tall grass, urging Luna to hurry when it came a faint, eerie hey from the fence line. At the time of this experience, the surrounding houses did not have their lights on. nor did it seem like any of my neighbors were actually outside. I dismissed it as a raccoon or a fox, my rational mind fighting to stay calm. I think I was standing close to the tall grass when I heard a quiet, "Hey," come from the fence line. But 5 seconds later, it came again, clearer, unmistakable. It was dark in that area, so I assumed it was some kind of animal, and since I didn't want to freak myself out, I tried my best to ignore it. Then a woman's voice, soft but insistent, called out, "Hey, come here, come here." 5 seconds later, I heard the voice again. "Hey!" This time I could tell, though, that it was a woman's voice. My blood ran cold. The voice then continued saying, "Hey, come here, come here." It distinctly sounded like a woman trying to get me to come over there. It wasn't a neighbor or a prankster. It felt wrong, like a lure baited with malice. But my gut told me to go inside ASAP. I bolted for the door, heart-pounding Luna trailing behind, confused. I freaked out and ran inside my dog. Sadly unaware of what was going on, refused to follow me inside. Inside, I locked the door, my hands trembling. Visibly shaking, I frantically called my boyfriend, who rushed over to investigate the backyard. He, of course, found nothing and assured me that it was probably an animal. But I knew better. I've read a couple of stories about animals sounding like humans, and I tried my best to come up with a logical solution. But I am positive that I heard a human voice calling me. The voice was too clear, too deliberate. The voice was so clearly human. I replayed it in my mind, searching for an explanation, but none fit. During my time outside last night, I never heard footsteps or rustling in the woods or anything. Whatever it was, it hadn't moved through the grass or snapped a twig. It was just there, right at the fence. To me, it feels like whatever was calling me must have been right outside of my fence line and was calling me over so that I would be close enough to get to. What was it? A person? A thing? I'm not sure if I experienced a person or some kind of creature, but whatever it was, it felt so evil, and I knew that I was in danger by being outside. The malice in that voice clung to me, a warning I couldn't shake. I am absolutely terrified to go outside at night again, but I know that I can't avoid it. I needed answers, so I turned to the internet. Diving into forums and old stories about Atlanta's suburbs, one thread caught my eye. Tales of a fence walker, a spectral figure said to haunt the edges of properties near the woods, mimicking human voices to draw people close. Had I brushed against something ancient? Something hungry? The next day, I walked the fence line in daylight, Luna at my side. The grass was untouched, no signs of anyone or anything having been there. But I found something odd, a small rusted charm, like a pendant, half buried in the dirt near the fence. It looked old, etched with symbols I didn't recognize. I left it where it was unnerved. Later, I visited a local historical society, where an archivist mentioned that my neighborhood was built on land, once used as a makeshift hospital during the Civil War. Nurses, often women, tended to the wounded, and some never left their stories fading into legend. Was the voice one of them? Or something masquerading as human? I started noticing things after that night. The porch light flickered at odd hours, and Luna growled at the fence line, her hackles raised. I installed brighter floodlights, their beams cutting through the dark, but they only made the woods seem deeper, more secretive. I have some lights around my backyard, but clearly not enough, so I plan on installing some around the fence perimeter. I also began carrying a flashlight and keeping my phone ready when taking Luna out. Has anyone ever experienced anything like this? Is there anything that I can do to prevent this from happening again? I reached out to a local paranormal group who suggested sage and protective charms, but I wasn't convinced. The voice felt too real, too deliberate to be warded off so easily. Now every night is a test of courage. I stand at the door, scanning the yard, wondering if the voice will return. I've started researching the pendant, hoping it holds a clue. A neighbor, an older woman who's lived here for decades, told me she once heard a voice calling her dog's name years ago, near the same wooded edge. She never saw anything, but she stopped walking her yard at night. Is something out there, waiting for someone to answer its call? I don't know if I'll ever feel safe again, but I'm determined to find out what's lurking just beyond my fence. The stranger in the basement. The basement was a tomb, its walls steeped in the damp chill of a century-old house. At 20, Sophie had carved out a fragile sanctuary here, a rented corner of the capital city, where neon lights from the nearby nightclub bled through the cracks. She was a student, her days ruled by lecture halls and deadlines, her nights by the hum of a city that never slept. While I was living and studying in the capital of my country, I had a small rented basement of a 1917-built house next to a nightclub. But tonight, as she drifted toward sleep, the city's pulse felt too close, too alive, as if it had slipped inside her walls. The room was small, barely enough space for a bed and a recliner, its single window barred against the world. Sophie had checked the door earlier, then hesitated, her hand hovering over the lock. Right before I fell asleep, I remembered that I forgot to lock the door. The city was safe, she told herself, and the entrance, hidden behind a gate around the house down a flight of stairs, was too obscure for trouble. But as her eyes closed, a faint unease lingered like a whisper she couldn't quite hear. In the silence, something stirred, waiting for the moment she let her guard down. She woke to a sensation, subtle but wrong, slow tug at her blanket, inching it away. Her heart lurched, her mind foggy with sleep. But her hand shot out instinctively. It met flesh, a coarse, hairy arm, unmistakably male under her fingers. I wake up and feel someone or something slowly pulling my blanket off of me. I extend my hand and feel a hairy male arm under my fingers. The darkness was absolute, the room a void swallowing her scream. For a moment she thought of her flatmate, but he was across town, leaving her alone with this stranger in the night. Panic surged, but Sophie forced it down. Her survival instinct sharper than fear. She lunged for the light switch, her bare feet slapping the cold floor. The bulb flickered, revealing a man her age, disheveled, standing by her bed in soaked underwear, his eyes glassy with confusion. I find a stranger around my age, student standing in his underwear by my bed, with his underwear clearly wet. He swayed unsteady as if he didn't know where he was. The air reeked of alcohol and something sharper, something that made her skin crawl. Sophie's voice was steady, a mask over her racing pulse. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her tone calm but firm. I calmly asked him, "Man, what are you doing in here?" The stranger blinked, then collapsed into her recliner, his wet clothes leaving a stain. He extended a hand, absurdly formal, and mumbled his name. Mark, as if they'd met at a bar, not in her bedroom at 3 a.m. Sophie's mind raced. Was he dangerous? Drugged, she stepped back, her hand brushing the phone on her nightstand, ready to dial for help. The absurdity of the moment clashed with her fear. He extends his hand and introduces himself to me. Mark's voice was slurred, his movements sluggish, but his casual demeanor unnerved her more than aggression would have. "Get out," she said, her voice hardening, guiding him toward the hallway. There, a pile of damp clothes and shoes lay scattered, as if he'd stripped on his way in. The basement's narrow corridor felt suffocating, the walls pressing in as she steered him forward. But Mark paused, veering into the bathroom and locking the door behind him. The sound of the shower startled her, a hiss of water against tile. I hear him turn on the shower and proceed to knock on the door. "If you don't leave, I'm calling the cops," Sophie shouted, banging on the door. His reply was muffled, but defiant. "I'm not afraid of the police," She stood frozen, her phone now in hand, debating whether to make the call. Minutes later, the door opened, and Mark emerged naked, except for her flatmate's towel, grinning, as if he'd discovered a hotel amenity. He steps out of the bathroom butt naked with my flatmate's towel around his waist, looks at me, looking kind of content, and says, "Hey, did you see they've got a shower here?" Sophie's patience snapped. "This is my house," she yelled, her voice echoing in the cramped space. "I say, you're a total stranger and you just broke into my place." Mark's face shifted, confusion giving way to panic. "Oh, what have I done?" he stammered, fumbling to dress in the hallway, his wet clothes sticking to his skin. Sophie watched, torn between fear and disbelief, as he struggled into his shoes. She grabbed her phone, scrolling for a contact, any friend of his she could find to get him out. With trembling hands, she called a number from his phone, left carelessly among his clothes. A friend agreed to pick him up at the nightclub nearby. I even called one of his friends from my phone to come and pick him up at the club. Mark, now dressed, muttered apologies, his bravado gone. Sophie escorted him up the stairs past the gate, into the neon-lit street, the nightclub's bass thumping in the distance. He was from another town, she learned, kicked out of the club for fighting, lost in a haze of drugs or drink, or both. The gate clanged shut behind him, but the basement no longer felt like hers. She checked every corner, every shadow, her hands shaking as she locked the door twice, then 3 times. The house, with its ancient bones, seemed to watch her, its silence heavier than before. She never learned how Mark found her hidden entrance, navigating the gate and stairs in his stupor. The nightclub security had no answers, and the city's safety felt like a lie she'd told herself. Sophie moved out months later, but the memory clung like damp air. She kept a knife by her bed, checked locks obsessively, and avoided basements. The house's history whispers of tenants long gone, of nights when the nightclub's chaos, spilled too close, haunted her thoughts. She wondered if Mark remembered that night, or if he'd stumbled into other lives, a ghost in someone else's story. But for Sophie, the stranger's face lit by that flickering bulb was a warning. Safety was fragile, and the dark could hide anything. Silent Clown. The unseen watcher. Some doors should never open. When I was a child, our apartment was my world. Small, safe, familiar. My dad was away for weeks, leaving Mom and me alone. I was never really scared easy, as I've always been in love with investigating the paranormal, yet respecting it at the same time. If a room felt wrong, I'd leave no questions, just instinct. If I go into a room and I don't feel welcome, I just don't stay. It just seems like common sense to me. But something crept into my sleep. Something I couldn't walk away from. Nightmares came relentless. They were always the same. I'd be sleeping in bed with my mom. I was pretty young at this point, and I woke up. A figure loomed, a clown massive, filling the doorway. The clown was emotionless with black and small eyes. I don't ever remember seeing a mouth, but I know that it had one. Its face was white and gray, a mask of dread. It was severely overweight, at least 400 to 500 pounds, about the size of the doorframe, so almost 6'8". In the dream, it charged silent, slaughtering us. It cast a feeling of dread. Yet at the same time, I got the feeling that it just didn't want to be seen. It was curious, watching me, its eyes piercing. I got the feeling that it was curious and observant of me, and didn't want to be caught or known about. The dreams haunted me, chaining me to fear. I had this dream, and I was terrified to do anything by myself. One night remained before Dad's return, and I dreaded my own bed. We went to bed, and eventually I fell asleep. But I woke up right after the same dream for like the 14th time in a row. This time, dread clung to me. My gut screamed. It wasn't just a dream. Something in my gut told me that it was happening in real life now. I lay still, heart pounding in Mom's bed. I closed my eyes and pretended to go to sleep. I cracked them as far open as I could, while still looking asleep, and sort of positioned myself under my blanket perfectly to keep an eye on the door. The room was dim, the AC's hum the only sound. I waited, breath-shallow eyes fixed on the doorway. Then it came. The same exact clown, from the same exact dream, walked into the doorway. Its bulk blocked the light, its eyes glinting. It looked at my mom, then looked at me. It sat there silently. I'd assume making sure that we were asleep. My pulse roared, but I stayed frozen, a statue under the blanket. Then, just walked out. No sound, not a creak. I never heard 1 ounce of sound from him, but I could hear the AC. The air shifted heavy as it vanished. I didn't move. I heard the front door open and close too after that. The sound was soft, deliberate, like a secret. I got up and I didn't go back to bed that night. My body shook, my mind racing. The weirdest thing was that the next day, my dad asked my mom why the front door was unlocked, and she asked me if I unlocked it. She knew I'd stayed up, her eyes searching mine. In the end, I just said yes, because I knew that if I told them the truth, that I would sound crazy. I carried the lie. The clown's shadow, my silent burden. The apartment never felt the same. Every doorway was a threat, every night a test. It never made any sound verbally or physically by walking. That silence was its power, its presence, a weight I couldn't shake. I stopped sleeping alone, clinging to Mom's side. The clown didn't return, but its gaze lingered in my memory. Those black eyes, watching, waiting. I checked the locks, the windows, my paranoia growing. Days passed, and Dad's return brought normalcy, but not peace. I didn't tell him, didn't tell anyone. The lie about the door protected me from doubt, but it trapped me too. I was terrified to do anything by myself. I'd sit by the window staring at the courtyard, wondering if it was out there, invisible, silent. The AC's hum became my lullaby, a reminder of that night. I started sketching the clown, its form, spilling onto paper, gray, bloated, eyeless, yet seeing. The dreams faded, but the feeling didn't. I got the feeling that it was curious and observant of me. Was it still here in the walls and the shadows? I learned to trust my instincts, to feel the airs shift. If I go into a room and I don't feel welcome, I just don't stay. The apartment's corners grew darker, its silence louder. I'd lie awake listening, waiting for the door to open again. Years later, I left that place, but the clown followed me not in form, but in memory. Something in my gut told me that it was happening in real life now. That night had changed me, sharpened my senses. I wasn't the fearless paranormal hunter anymore. I was cautious, respectful, aware. The clown was my teacher, its silence, my lesson. I never saw it again, but I felt it watching, curious, unseen. The whispers of sorrow. The bedroom was a sanctuary until it wasn't. For 3 nights, Ethan's quiet world had unraveled, pierced by sounds that didn't belong. High-pitched wails, choked sobs, whispers of anguish. They haunted his room, seeping from the walls. It started 3 days ago, a disturbance so subtle he dismissed it. Now it was undeniable, and Ethan was running out of explanations. Something was here, and it wanted to be heard. The noises came like clockwork. Ethan was playing on his PS4 with headphones on, immersed in a virtual battlefield. A faint scream cut through the game's chaos, not loud but sharp like a needle in his ear. He kept hearing weird noises in his room, sometimes a yell, sometimes a sob, so raw it seemed to choke on itself. Was it the game, a glitch? He looked around for the source but found nothing. The room was still. Yet the air felt heavy, expectant. He blamed his gear. Ethan thought it was his headphones making a weird noise, their frayed wires notorious for static. He shook them, adjusted the plug. Nothing changed. He ignored it, sinking back into the game. But the sounds persisted, weaving through the gunfire and explosions. They lasted for about 2 seconds, sometimes just a split second. Each cry felt closer, as if something stood just beyond his vision. Ethan's pulse quickened. He turned off the console, but the silence was worse. The next night, the sounds followed him. Ethan was lying in bed watching YouTube, the glow of his phone a small comfort. At 9 p.m., the noises returned. Sobs, screams, whispers. He thought it was his pet bird making the noise. His canary Lila sometimes chirped in her sleep, but when he checked, she was sleeping. Her cage was still her tiny chest, rising and falling peacefully. Ethan went back to bed, but the noises resumed relentless. They weren't random. They had a rhythm, a purpose. The pattern was maddening. The noises went from every few minutes to about every 10 seconds. Ethan's nerves frayed as the cries grew sharper, more desperate. He tried to ignore it, hoping it would go away, but the room seemed to pulse with their presence. He sat up, and the noises suddenly stopped. The silence was a taunt, daring him to move again. The cycle repeated all night, a dance of sound and stillness that kept him awake until exhaustion won. What was this thing, and why his room, Ethan's bedroom, became a battleground? The third night, the noises were less frequent, but no less unsettling. They happened when Ethan was in his bedroom or close to it in the hallway. He stood in the doorway listening, but the cries seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. They sounded like someone screaming and crying, muffled, yet piercing like a voice trapped behind a veil. He checked the vents, the windows, nothing. The house was old, its bones creaking, but this was different. It felt alive. He searched for answers. Ethan's parents were away for the weekend, leaving him alone with Lila. He called a friend who suggested a loose pipe or a neighbor's TV, but the sounds were too human, too raw. Ethan didn't know what to do. He recorded the room with his phone, hoping to catch the noises, but the audio was just static. He felt like he'd looked everywhere. The cries weren't in the game, the bird, or the headphones. They were in the house, maybe in the walls. Desperation crept in. Ethan read about auditory hallucinations, but he wasn't stressed or sleep-deprived. He scoured local forums, finding a story about a woman who'd lived in the area decades ago. Her life ended in tragedy. Could her grief linger here? The noises were getting more annoying than frightening, but their persistence gnawed at him. He moved Lila's cage to the living room, hoping to isolate the source. The cries followed him, always near the bedroom, always watching. The fourth night, Ethan stayed in the living room, avoiding his room. The cries didn't come, but the silence felt like a predator waiting to strike. He researched the house's history, uncovering a fire in the 1970s that claimed a young woman's life. Her name was Eliza, a mother who'd lost her child. The sobs, the choked wails, could they be hers? Ethan shivered, picturing her trapped in the walls, her sorrow etched into the house. He tried to confront it. Standing in the hallway, Ethan spoke aloud, asking the noises to stop. The air grew cold, the cries softening to a whisper before fading. Was it listening? Ethan didn't understand where the noise was coming from, but he felt its weight. He lit a candle, a habit from his grandmother, and placed it near the bedroom door. The cries didn't return that night, but Ethan slept with the light on Lila's chirps, his only comfort. By the fifth day, Ethan was exhausted, but determined. He invited a friend to stay over, hoping another presence would deter the sounds. The cries were faint, almost shy, as if aware of the newcomer. Ethan didn't tell his parents, fearing they'd dismiss it. He wanted ideas to figure it out. The house was quiet now, but Ethan knew better. Eliza's sorrow, or whatever it was, wasn't gone. Just waiting. Some rooms he realized held more than memories. The black-eyed child in the closet. The house was a crumbling relic, squatting behind a neon-lit nightclub that pulsed with life. In the bad part of southeast Texas, where the air smelled of stale beer and swamp mud, my dad's childhood home stood like a forgotten memory. At night, the walls seemed to hum with secrets, as if the house itself was watching. My dad, barely 2, and his brother, 6, slept on a sagging couch in the living room, unaware of what lurked in the shadows. Then, in the dead of night, a glow flickered from the closet, a glow that didn't belong. It wasn't a light. It was something alive. Something wrong. So this is not my story, but my dad's. He grew up with a single mom and 4 other siblings in southeast Texas, on the border of Louisiana, in the bad part of town. The year was 1969, and life was hard. The house that this happened in was behind a nightclub. My dad, born in 1967, was too young to understand fear, but that night changed him. He was born in 1967, and says that this happened when he was 2, and he still remembers it. He and his brother curled up under a thin blanket, stirred awake, their eyes drawn to the closet door. He says him and his brother, who was maybe 6 at that time, were sleeping on the couch in the living room, and they both woke up to a black-eyed child standing in the doorway of their closet. The figure was a boy slightly older, with hair the color of rusted carrots. He said that the child looked older than them by a little, had black eyes and orange hair, and had a slight sort of glow to him. His eyes weren't just dark, they were voids swallowing light, and his skin shimmered faintly like he was under his own spotlight almost. My dad and his brother froze, their throats tightening. He said that him and his brother tried to scream, but nothing would come out. The child didn't move, didn't blink, just stared, his presence pressing against their small bodies like a weight. Then the child just suddenly disappeared before their eyes. The room snapped back to darkness, but the terror lingered. And the reason that everybody knows that this is true is that a couple of months ago, me and my mom and my dad, we were at my grandma's house. The memory stayed buried for decades, a secret too heavy to share. And my uncle was watching a documentary on black-eyed children when my dad brought up what happened to them all those years ago. My uncle, now a man worn by years of struggle, turned pale, and my uncle started tearing up a bit and just kept repeating, "Man, you seen that too? I thought that I was crazy. I can't believe that you saw him too." His voice cracked, the pain of 50 years spilling out. My uncle has a history of drug usage and mental health problems, and all of these years, for over 50 years, he assumed that what he had seen was fake, and just his mind playing tricks on him. It's sad too, because we think that this situation shook him up so badly as a kid that it might have been the cause of his use of drugs as a teen to cope with the thought that he may have been going crazy. The brothers, terrified, vowed never to speak of it. They were so scared that they just never brought it up ever again after that. But my dad couldn't forget. But my dad always told my mom that story, ever since they started dating. My grandma, overhearing their conversation, grew quiet. My grandma, who was sitting there listening to them talk about what happened, just said, "There was something in that house, Lord," her voice heavy with unspoken stories. And after hearing that, I'm going to try and get her to tell me about her experiences in that same house. That night wasn't the only strangeness in that house. My dad later recalled other moments. Faint knocks from the walls, a cold spot in the hallway that never warmed. I started digging, calling cousins and aunts, piecing together fragments of the house's past. The nightclub behind it had been a speakeasy in the 1920s. 20s, a place of shady deals and sudden violence. Locals whispered about a boy not quite right who'd wandered the area decades ago, never seen again after a fire swept through the block. Was he the child in the closet, bound to the house by some unfinished tragedy? I visited the town last year hoping to see the house. It was gone, replaced by a parking lot. But the nightclub still stood, its neon sign flickering. I met an old bartender who'd worked there since the 70s. He didn't laugh when I mentioned the black-eyed child. Instead, he leaned close and said others had seen it too, a glowing figure near the old house, always at night, always silent. He called it a watcher, something that didn't belong to the living or the dead. His words stayed with me, heavy and cold. Now I can't stop wondering what my grandma knows. She's cagey, changing the subject when I press, but her eyes betray fear. I've started researching black-eyed children, finding stories that mirror my dad's figures, that appear without warning, their gaze paralyzing, their purpose unclear. Some say they're spirits, others something darker, feeding on fear. What did that child want from my dad and uncle? The house is gone, but its shadow lingers in our family, a story we can't escape. And I wonder if I dig too deep, will I see those black eyes too? The black cloud's shadow. The house was old, its walls carrying whispers of a past no one dared to name. When Lucas and his wife Anna moved in 3 years ago, it was just another fixer-upper, a gift from her grandmother's estate. But the air inside felt heavy, as if the house held its breath, waiting for something to stir. So my wife and I moved into her grandma's old house maybe 3 years ago now. Their daughter Lily, only 2 but sharp as a tack, filled the rooms with laughter until the night she saw something no child should. It began with a sound faint but wrong, creeping from the shadows of the master bedroom. The closet in that room was a relic, its door warped and stubborn, hiding a space that smelled of dust and time. Anna's grandmother had warned of it, muttering about hauntings, but Lucas scoffed, dismissing the tales as old woman nonsense. My wife always told me that her grandma would tell her the closet and the bathroom in the master bedroom were haunted. Yet as Lily grew, her bright eyes began to linger on corners, her small hands pointing at things unseen. One night alone in the house, Lucas felt a chill that wasn't from the draft, a presence that pressed against his skin. The house wasn't empty, and it hadn't been for a long time. Lily's world changed when her baby brother arrived, jealousy pulling her back to her parents' bed. When we had our newborn, the 2-year-old wanted back in our room because, well, she felt left out. She'd lie between them, her tiny voice chattering, until one night she froze, staring at the ceiling. "Mean cloud, go away," she whispered, her words slicing through the dark. Lucas laughed it off, but Anna's face paled, her eyes darting to the closet door, slightly ajar, despite being locked earlier. The room felt smaller, the shadows thicker, as if something hovered just out of sight. Weeks later, the house began to speak. While Lily was at her grandparents' for a sleepover, a melody broke the silence. "Rain, rain, go away." Blaring from her tablet buried in the closet, the phone started playing loud. "Rain, rain, go away" music. We opened up the phone, and YouTube said video unavailable. Lucas yanked the device free, its screen dark, the app unresponsive. The battery was dead, yet the music had played a tinny echo that didn't belong. He checked the closet, finding nothing but old coats and a faint acrid smell like burnt air. Anna's voice trembled as she recalled her grandmother's warning stories Lucas had ignored. At the park, the strangeness followed. Lily swung gently, her laughter bright. But Lucas noticed 2 swings at the end, moving wildly, as if pushed by invisible hands. 2 swings at the end are fully swinging, like kids are on them. No wind stirred the trees, no children ran nearby. He filmed it, his phone capturing the eerie motion, the stillness of the other swings, mocking his rational mind. Back home, Lily's behavior grew worse, her small body curling into Anna's chest at night, her voice a plea. "Black cloud, go away." Her screams woke the house, her tiny hands covering her ears against something only she could hear. Lily's fear became a nightly ritual. My daughter will say the same things, but cover her ears and try hiding in my wife's chest to get away, and start screaming as loud as she can. Lucas, working night shifts, would return to find Anna shaken, her eyes red from sleepless worry. One night, Anna called him, her voice breaking. My wife called me in tears as she woke up to my 2-year-old hunched over yelling, "No, no." Lily had climbed under the bed, banging her head against the floor, her lip bleeding from the impact. Lucas raced home, finding his daughter trembling, her small face streaked with blood and fear. The house felt alive, its shadows mocking their attempts to comfort her. Anna turned to her grandmother, now frail and battling dementia, for answers. My wife talked to her grandma, who used to live here, and she came over 3 days ago. In the living room, with the closet and bathroom doors shut tight, the old woman spoke. Grandma said, "Oh, honey," and walked to the bedroom and shut the closet and the bathroom door. She described a black cloud that swooped at her years ago, a presence she'd taunted unafraid. Grandma stated that she would tell the black cloud, "Oh, you think you're funny." But her memories were foggy, tangled in dreams, leaving more questions than clarity. The house seemed to listen, its silence a challenge to their disbelief. Lucas, a skeptic, began to waver. The lights flickered, bulbs burning out faster than normal. The kitchen clock stopped daily, its hands frozen at 2 a.m. Anna noticed small things. A toy moved, a door creaking open. She swore she'd closed. Lily's fear wasn't just night terrors. It was too specific, too consistent. Lucas reviewed the park footage, the tablet incident, and Anna's recording of her grandmother searching for logic, but finding none. The house's history was a blank slate, its previous tenants a mystery, but the neighbors' vague mention of trouble years ago lingered. They took Lily to a doctor, ruling out illness or deficiencies, but the visits offered no peace. Lucas installed cameras, hoping to catch something, anything, to explain the chaos. The footage showed nothing yet. The house felt crowded, its air thick with an unseen weight. Anna began praying, her faith a shield against the unknown, while Lucas wrestled with his doubt. Lily's laughter returned during the day, but at night her eyes searched the ceiling, as if the cloud waited just beyond the light. The family considered moving, but the house held them its secrets, a chain they couldn't break. The black cloud never showed itself, but its shadow stretched long. Lucas wondered if it was tied to the land, to the house's bones, or to something older, something that fed on fear. Anna's grandmother's words echoed. "You're wasting your time. I'm not scared of you." But Lily was, and her terror was a mirror to their own. The house watched patient, its walls a canvas for whatever came next. Lucas locked the closet each night, but he knew some doors couldn't be shut, and some clouds never drifted away. Glow of the unknown, the Min-Min encounter. The night holds secrets no map can chart. In the vast, quiet stretches of country New South Wales, where stars burn bright against an endless sky, I felt the pull of the unknown. As a teenager, I'd ride with my dad through the dark to catch a bus in Parks, a small town an hour and a half from home, to visit my boyfriend hours away. The bus arrived back late at night, and my dad would always pick me up. Those drives were routine until the night the world tilted. On 2 separate occasions, we saw something strange. It began on a country road between 2 towns. The road sliced through pheno farms, their fields rolling under a bright night sky. There were hills behind these farms that were silhouetted against the often bright night sky. And we saw a big ball of light traveling down the hill, parallel to our car, probably a couple of kilometers away. It glided smoothly, a single glowing orb. We thought that it was just a truck, at first possibly driving along there, until we both realized that there wasn't actually a road there. No road, no headlights. It was one light, not two like car headlights. It wasn't a motorcycle either. The light moved too fluidly, too fast, untouched by the rough terrain. It moved so smoothly and quickly, and we just thought that it was really weird. We exchanged glances, puzzled, but not alarmed. My dad, ever practical, shrugged it off. I tucked it away. A curiosity for my paranormal-loving mind. We didn't really think too much about it until a few weeks later, when we were doing the same drive late at night. The same hill, the same glow, brighter, closer, undeniable. We saw the same light in the same area moving quickly and smoothly again. This time Dad acted. This time, Dad decided to stop the car and turn off the engine. The world fell silent. The engine's hum replaced by the chirp of crickets. When he did that, the light came down the hill and it was hurtling towards us across the farm fields and over the fence that divided the farms from the road. It was fast, impossibly fast. The ball of light was probably about 2 meters off the ground and had a diameter of around 1.5 meters, I would say. It pulsed silent, its edges shimmering. It was huge, silent, a ball of light that kind of fluctuated and rotated as it moved. Fear gripped me. It slowed and hovered in the middle of the road behind our car, probably about 50 meters behind us. My heart hammered, my breath shallow. I was terrified, but Dad was fascinated watching it inquisitively. His eyes gleamed with wonder, a scientist in a farmer's body. I was panicking and yelling to start the car and drive. The light held its ground, a sentinel in the dark. Was it watching us? I'd read about min lights years later, fuzzy orbs in the outback, but this was no tale. It was real here now. http://10 Wikipedia orgs wiki min. https. We fled, but the light stayed with me. Dad turned the engine on, and we just started driving. The car roared to life, tires crunching gravel as we sped away. We never saw that light again, but that was the most bizarre thing that I've ever seen. My mind raced, replaying the orb's dance, its size, its silence, its impossible path. Every now and again, I mention it to my dad, just so that I know that I'm not going crazy, and he always confirms every detail of it with me. His steady voice anchors me, his memory a mirror of mine. I'm glad we were both there, because otherwise I would probably think that I was going mad. I hadn't heard of min lights until years later. When I did in a dusty book about Australian folklore, my blood ran cold. The things that people have described as min lights match exactly what we saw. Fuzzy glowing orbs, moving with purpose, seen in places like Brewarina, New South Wales, not just Queensland's Channel Country. They're part of Aboriginal stories, spirits or guardians. Some say tied to the land long before settlers came. That night, I felt their truth, a glimpse into something beyond reason. In wikipedia.org wiki min, medium.com. The unexplained min lights, the Australian phenomena. The road became my obsession. I'd drive it in my mind, tracing the hills, the farms, the fence. Was it a fata morgana, a mirage bending distant light? Scientists say so, citing temperature inversions in the desert air. But our light moved, crossed fields, hovered. No truck, no campfire could do that. I'd always loved the paranormal chasing stories of ghosts and unexplained sights. But this was different. It wasn't a thrill. It was a question etched in light, demanding answers I didn't have. http. AustralianGeographic.com. Blogs, Der Carl need to know, the min mystery. Dad and I never spoke of it to others. It was ours, a shared secret too strange for casual talk. I scoured forums, finding whispers of similar lights in New South Wales, but none matched our encounter's clarity. The hills loomed in my dreams, their silhouette a gate to the unknown. I wondered about the land's history. Were those farms sacred, guarded by something ancient? Aboriginal tales spoke of lights as protectors, warning travelers away. Had we trespassed unaware? Reddit. Kamart Aboriginal comments. Dikes min lights. Dinyan ponderings akamdot the ghost. Lights of Australian nights. I changed after that night. My curiosity sharpened my senses, tuned to the world's edges. I'd watch the sky on clear nights, half hoping, half fearing the light's return. It never came, but its mark remained. I'll never forget it. And I'm wondering if anyone else has ever seen something like this in country New South Wales. The stories I found were mostly Queensland's tales of orbs, chasing cars, vanishing into the dark. But our light was here, in the quiet hills of New South Wales, a mystery that chose us. htc.reddit.com, Shar Australia. Comments, Shakor, have you seen Min lights? The unknown doesn't fade, it grows. Years later, I still search for answers. I've read lots of stories of these sorts of lights in Queensland, but not New South Wales. Each tale feels like a piece of my puzzle, incomplete but vital. I've asked locals, old farmers, even historians, but none recall a light like ours. The silence only fuels my drive. My paranormal passion sparked young burns, brighter now, fed by that glowing orb. I drive that road sometimes alone, the hills unchanged. The farms sleep under the same bright sky, but the light is gone. Or is it, I feel it, a presence in the air waiting? Dad's fascination lives in me, tempered by my fear. We saw something real, something alive in its own way. Min light, spirits, or science, it doesn't matter. It was ours, a fleeting gift from the unknown, and it reshaped me. I'll keep looking. Keep asking. Because some mysteries are worth chasing, even if they never resolve. The boy with the knife. The summer streets were a playground, but not all paths were safe. Two 10-year-old cousins, Jamie and Liam, roamed their small town chasing adventure under a boundless sky. Their world was one of football fields and tree climbs untouched by the digital age. They decided to explore a part of town they'd never explored before, a choice that would haunt them for decades. What they found wasn't a game, it was a nightmare carved in steel. The alley was a tunnel of shadows. They went through alleyways and back streets, the air thick with the scent of dust and forgotten gardens. Terraced houses loomed on their left, their windows like unblinking eyes. To the left were terraced houses, and to the right, steel fences with sharp points. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows that seemed to move on their own. It was a sunny day, not too warm, but a chill crept into Jamie's bones. Something about this place felt wrong. A voice shattered the quiet. One of the kids from their school lived there, and his mom shouted, "What are you boys doing here?" Her tone was sharp, accusatory, and the boys bolted, their sneakers pounding the pavement. They ran, hearts racing, not sure why they fled, but driven by instinct. Another kid appeared, breathless. "Don't go that way," he said, his voice trailing off as he ran farther away. His warning hung in the air, heavy and unexplained. The alley opened to a new danger. They emerged from the alleyway and saw the lone boy. He stood motionless, a figure out of place in the fading light. A boy aged maybe 10 to 12 stood there, his eyes empty. A vacant look on his face. Half his face was hidden by a veil, thin and ghostly, like a costume worn out of season. Above his mouth was covered with a veil, somewhat like a Halloween mask. Jamie's breath caught as he saw it. The boy had a kitchen knife in his hands, a fully real stainless steel kitchen knife. The blade gleamed with menace. Both hands on the handle, the sunlight made the blade glisten. Jamie and Liam froze, their bravado crumbling. They cracked a joke cooking outside, but he looked at them blankly. No emotion. His stillness was unnatural, his gaze a void that swallowed their courage. They realized he hadn't moved not a muscle. The knife held close to his chest didn't waver, its tip pointing skyward. They saw him blink, but the knife hadn't been raised or pointed at them. This wasn't a prank, it was something far worse. Fear rooted them in place. The boys' silence was louder than any threat. They figured they should get away, their instincts screaming to flee. The alley behind them was a trap, too narrow, too long. Going back down the alleyway didn't seem safe. In front of them, a steep hill led to a road. A lifeline to safety. In front of them was a road on a steep hill. They moved slowly, eyes locked on the boy, praying he wouldn't follow. They walked up to the top of the hill, keeping an eye on this kid. The top of the hill was 2 to 3 minutes from Jamie's house. Each step felt like an eternity, the boys' gaze burning into their backs. They looked back down the hill. The lone kid had put the knife by his leg, holding it in one hand, and stared right back up at them, expressionless. His stillness was a promise, a warning that he could move if he chose to. They felt safe at the hill's crest, but the image of that veiled face lingered. The town, once their playground, now hid secrets they couldn't unsee. They told their parents what had happened, their voices trembling as they recounted the encounter. Jamie's mother paled, her hands shaking as she called the community enforcement team. They called a local community enforcement team to scout the area. The officers found the boy still clutching the knife, but no answers followed. The kid was found with the knife, but they never heard why he was there or what he was doing. The silence from the authorities was as unsettling as the boy himself. Years later, the memory clung to Jamie like a shadow. He and Liam rarely spoke of it, but the boy's empty eyes haunted their dreams. 23 years after it happened, it's still on Jamie's mind a lot. He researched the town's history, uncovering tales of troubled children runaways who vanished into the alleys. Was the boy one of them, or something else? The veil, the knife, the stillness. None of it made sense. Jamie wondered if the kid had been a ghost, a memory of some forgotten tragedy. The alley was gone now, replaced by new houses. But Jamie avoided that part of town. He asked older residents, but no one remembered a boy with a veil. Liam, now a father, swore he'd seen the boy blink, but the memory felt less certain with time. Jamie kept a knife in his own home, not for fear, but as a reminder to trust his instincts. The town had moved on, but Jamie hadn't. Some encounters he knew marked you forever. He visited the hill recently, standing where they'd escaped. The air felt different, lighter, but a faint unease remained. Jamie pictured the boy, wondering if he still stood in some other alley waiting. The knife's glint, the veiled face, they were etched into his soul. The trail ended 2 to 3 minutes from his house, a safe haven that felt less safe now. Some streets, Jamie learned, held more than memories. They held mysteries that never let go. The closet's unseen hand. The house was too quiet. The kind of silence that presses against your ears. At 3 years old, I didn't know fear, only wonder, as I sat in my bedroom in our modest Massachusetts home. But that night, something stirred in the closet, something that didn't belong. The air grew heavy, like a storm was brewing inside the walls. Was it the house, or was it watching me? Then a faint creak echoed from the closet door, and my tiny world shifted. So my very first experience happened when I was about 3 to 4 years old. I was a small, curious kid, living in a cozy house in a tight-knit neighborhood in Massachusetts. I used to live in this cute little house in a very close-knit community, or neighborhood, up in Massachusetts. The house was simple but warm, with a ground floor and upstairs and a cellar that smelled of damp earth. It was a modest house with an upstairs ground floor and cellar areas. Walking through the front door, the living room opened to the right, the kitchen to the left, and a staircase rose straight ahead. Immediately upon walking through the front door, the living room was to your right, the kitchen to your left, and a staircase was directly to your front. At the top of the stairs, there were 2 rooms to the left and right, which was my room on the right, and my parents' room to the left. My room felt like a kingdom to my young eyes, filled with treasures, stuffed animals, a creaky bed, and a closet that held secrets. Now, I don't remember much about my parents' room, but mine felt humongous as a kid. The closet was tiny, barely big enough for my clothes, but it had a peculiar feature. A small locked door at the top, leading to an attic room my parents never used. There were a lot of interesting things about my room too, but one of the most interesting things about it was the closet. I didn't know it then, but that door was a mystery. I was unaware of it, but there was a door at the top of my closet that went up into the attic-themed sort of bedroom above mine. The closet was very small, a typical one, with a light bulb and a dangle string to turn it on and off, and a rod to hang clothes. It was ordinary, except for that strange door. Needless to say, the door was definitely oddly placed. My parents never used it, which is even more odd. In retrospect, that day I was playing in front of the open closet surrounded by my toys. But anyway, my first experience, as you could probably guess, happened in my bedroom. I'd dragged out a blue Lego bucket, spilling Legos, Play-Doh, and colored pencils across the floor. I kept some of my toys in my closet, and I had pulled them out. At one point, it was a blue rectangular Lego bucket, filled with miscellaneous toys and doohickeys, and of course, Legos. I'd also pulled out some pieces of paper Play-Doh and colored pencils. I was lost in my world, molding Play-Doh snakes and scribbling on paper, trying to mimic my dad's cube drawings. At one point, I was going ham with every toy and entertaining item that I had. And well, my dad had been in the habit of drawing cubes at the time, and that had confounded my childhood brain. How did he draw the back of the cube? I kept thinking, how in the world is he putting the pencil into the paper to draw the back part of the cube like that? I stabbed at the paper, determined to crack the mystery. So just imagine a little booger-nosed child sitting in front of an open closet with all his toys, Legos and snakes made out of Play-Doh, stabbing a piece of paper with a colored pencil trying to draw the back of a cube. Then it happened. A soft noise like a sigh came from the closet, when all of a sudden I was distracted by a noise in the closet, and upon looking up, noticed a little dangle switch. For the light bulb was swaying back and forth. I glanced up, curious but unfazed, and went back to my paper. I thought absolutely nothing of it, and continued stabbing my paper. Moments later, another sound sharper like a tap. A couple of moments later, another noise came from the closet. But this time the dangle was flailing back and forth like crazy. The string whipped wildly, as if caught in a storm. I thought to myself, adult stuff that I don't understand, whatever, and continued on. I shrugged, too young to question it, and kept drawing, but the closet wasn't done. The noises stopped, and the string froze, hanging still as death. I apparently was able to, or that child me, just didn't give a hoot without giving it a second thought. And then the noise changed. I looked up, and the string began to move deliberately. I looked up again to see the string completely motionless, and it proceeded to pull down over and over again, turning the light on and off. It tugged itself, the bulb flickering like a heartbeat. Then the door literally closed by itself. The closet door swung shut with a soft thud, sealing the darkness inside. I thought, never seen that before. Must be adult stuff, whatever. I blinked unbothered and returned to my toys, not knowing I'd just witnessed something impossible. This is one of those experiences that I guess gave me extra goosebumps later on, because I only realized in hindsight that that was not supposed to happen. Years later, that memory haunted me. As I grew, I realized no draft could move a string like that. No accident could close a door so neatly. I asked my parents about the house. My mom frowned, admitting she'd always felt uneasy in my room, though she never said why. My dad, usually skeptical, paused before saying, the attic door had always bothered him. It was locked tight, but he'd heard faint scratches from behind it once. Was something up there reaching down into my closet? I returned to the neighborhood as an adult, tracking down the house. It still stood, though worn by time. The new owners, a young couple, let me inside. My room was smaller than I remembered, the closet unchanged, the attic door still there, still locked. I asked if they'd noticed anything strange. The wife hesitated, then said their son, about my age when it happened, refused to sleep in that room. He'd complained of noises, taps, hums, and once saw the closet light flicker on its own. Was the house holding on to something? Something that played with strings and doors. I started researching the house's history. Town records showed it was built in the 1920s, home to a family who'd lost a child, a boy, about 7, under mysterious circumstances. He'd been found in the attic, the door locked from the inside. No one knew how he got there. Locals whispered about the house, calling it unlucky. I found a photo in the archives, the boy, pale and serious, staring at the camera. Did he linger, tugging at strings to be noticed? Now I can't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone that day. The closet door, the attic above, it's like they were a gateway, and something slipped through. I've since moved far away, but I dream of that room, of the string pulling itself, the door closing. What was in that closet, and why did it choose me? The house is still there, waiting for its next guest. And I wonder, if I opened that attic door, what would I find? The mist at the window. The house was a relic, its creaking floors and sagging walls, a testament to decades forgotten. At 10, Jamie called it home. His small room, a fortress against the world outside. Each night he'd lie in bed, the darkness wrapping him like a blanket, his eyes fixed on the window by the door. My bed was in the far corner of my room from the bedroom door, and next to my bedroom door, there was a window. But as the stars faded, something else appeared. A light, pale and strange, that didn't belong. It wasn't a ghost, not exactly, but it watched him, and he watched it back. The window was old, its glass warped, framing a view of the yard where shadows danced. Jamie would stare, waiting for sleep, when the light came, a soft blue mist, hovering just beyond the pane. I laid in my bed, facing this window every night, and it was what I usually focused on as I fell asleep. It wasn't bright, not like a street lamp or the moon, but faint, like breath on a cold morning. He blinked, and it shifted as if it knew he was looking, as if it wanted him to see. The night held its breath, and Jamie felt it. The house was alive, and the mist was its secret. He wasn't afraid. Not really. The mist was constant, a companion in the quiet hours, neither threatening nor kind. A pale blue light would be in my window every night. It swirled, formless at first, until Jamie's thoughts gave it shape. He loved the Iron Giant, the towering robot from his favorite movie, and so the mist became that tall, translucent, striding across the yard, but never closer. It became whatever I would think about it at the time. I loved Iron Giant movie, so that is what I constantly imagined. Each night he'd watch his creation, a silent guardian woven from light and dreams. The mist was his secret, a ritual that marked the edge of sleep. I'd watched this until I fell asleep for months. Some nights he imagined other shapes, a dragon, a knight, a spaceship. But the Iron Giant was his favorite, its glowing eyes a comfort in the dark. The house seemed to approve its creaks softer, its shadows less sharp when the mist was there. Jamie wondered if it came from the land from the oak trees that loomed beyond the fence, or from something older buried in the earth. He never told his parents, knowing they'd call it a trick of the eyes, a child's fancy. Months passed, the mist a constant in Jamie's nights, until it wasn't. I don't really recollect when it stopped. One evening, the window stayed dark, the mist gone without warning. He waited, eyes straining, but the yard was empty, the night ordinary. The house felt heavier, as if it mourned the loss, its walls holding secrets Jamie couldn't reach. He began to doubt, wondering if his mind had painted the light, if the Iron Giant was just a story he'd told himself. But the memory lingered, vivid and unshakable, a piece of magic he carried into adulthood. Years later, Jamie returned to the house, now empty, its paint peeling under the weight of time. He stood in his old room, the window unchanged, and felt a pang of something nostalgia or longing. The town's librarian mentioned a history of strange lights in the area, tales of travelers seeing glimmers in the fields, never explained. Jamie listened, his childhood certainty reignited, and wondered if the mist still visited, waiting for another child to shape its form. The house was silent, but its windows held a promise. Some lights never fade. They only wait for someone to see them again. Echoes of my mind. Some sounds aren't meant to be heard. At 13, I was a kid caught between worlds. Virginia's open fields and Massachusetts' cozy corners, where my grandmother's apartment felt like a second home. I had visited this place many times as a kid because my parents needed a break from me and dropped me off to my grandma's. And I never really experienced anything weird, I guess you could say, even in hindsight. Her place was warm, familiar, safe. When they asked me to take the couch in the living room at night, I really thought nothing of it and obliged. But the dark had plans I couldn't foresee. I was in the pitch-black darkness, laying on the couch in my grandmother's apartment. My Game Boy glowed Pokemon Emerald, my only company. I had my Game Boy with my Pokemon Emerald game inserted, and for those of you familiar with Pokemon specifically, Ruby, Sapphire, and Emerald, there is a Pokemon named Zigzagoon with the ability Pickup that allows them to be holding random goodies after a battle. I was grinding, chasing rare candies, only to realize they had nerfed this method in Emerald and made the loot level-based. Frustration bubbled as I lay there. The screens light a tiny shield against the void. Picture me on the couch, slowly figuring this out on my own, and becoming increasingly annoyed at Pokemon. Then a thought struck. It sort of randomly dawned on me that I was in the pitch-black darkness. It wasn't fear, not yet just an odd artificial awareness like someone else planted the idea. I wasn't scared of the dark, but this thought came to me in a way that I can only describe as artificially, I guess. I'd never cared before, lost in Pokemon's world. Immediately upon having this realization, I suddenly heard something on the ceiling, a muffled murmur like a man's voice, relentless, unbroken. It was almost muffled, but it sounded like a man constantly mumbling without a pause. I perked up and looked up at the ceiling like, what is that? It wasn't upstairs, not a neighbor. Bear in mind, it sounded like it was in the room with me, not our neighbor above or anything. The sound grew, words sharpening. The sound began to get louder, and the words became more discernible. They weren't random, they were mine. They were my thoughts. If I thought door, it whispered door, looping, unyielding, freaked out. I casually got under the covers while assuring myself that I wasn't actually scared. I'm just cold. And I'm getting comfy is what I told myself. My heart raced, but I clung to denial, a kid fighting the impossible. The voice knew me. Whatever I thought this thing, or whatever it was, would recite it. It was a whisper, soft but piercing, filling the room. It was sort of like a mumbled whisper. But if I thought the word dog, it would say dog over and over and over again. I cranked the Game Boy's volume, desperate for distraction. Under the blankets, I turned the volume on my Pokemon game to max and pressed it against my face and flew my character to the battle frontier for the loudest music in the game. But the music was powerless. It didn't help. As a matter of fact, the voice descended down slowly from the ceiling, while it also became louder. It was coming closer, claiming the space around me. It wouldn't stop. The whisper slithered from the ceiling, now inches from my face, loud as a man beside me. When it got to the point where I definitely couldn't ignore it anymore, I just listened and grasped how it worked. It echoed every thought. If I thought any word, it would say it. My teenage brain, half terrified, half defiant, saw a game. My teenage mind immediately decided, haha, I can make it say the F word. And other expletives, so that's exactly what I did. I thought of the wildest, crudest words, and it obeyed, chanting them back. I made it say the most outrageous stuff that I could think of, and for about 30 seconds that was hilarious. But then it wasn't. The humor vanished as the voice pressed closer. Relentless. It was right next to my head, and pretty much just as loud as a real man whispering next to me. Its persistence was suffocating a tide that wouldn't recede. The thing that really began to scare me was how relentless it was with its whispers. My thoughts spiraled, fear taking hold. As I got scared, my thoughts began to reflect that. As I said before, it recited my thought. I thought, "What is this?" And it whispered, "What is that? What is that?" It's right next to my head. My own panic fed it a loop of dread. These were the things that were being repeated back to me that freaked me out into fight or flight mode. I chose fight. In the end, I chose fight. I immediately flipped my blanket off of my head and launched a haymaker in the direction of the sound. My fist cut the air wild, desperate. It immediately stopped, and when I looked around, there was nothing there. The room was empty, the darkness still. My Game Boy's screen flickered Pokemon's music, a faint hum. That was pretty much it for that situation. And it was the last time that I ever experienced anything of that nature. I sat up, breath ragged, staring into the void, waiting for it to return. It didn't. The apartment felt different now, its warmth tainted. I didn't sleep that night, my mind replaying the voice, its uncanny mimicry. Was it real? A trick of a tired mind? I'd always been curious about the paranormal, drawn to ghost stories and unexplained sounds. But this was too close, too personal. It wasn't a thrill, it was an invasion. I stayed on the couch, clutching the Game Boy, its light, my only anchor. The thought of my grandmother sleeping peacefully down the hall was both comforting and isolating. She hadn't heard a thing. Morning came gray and quiet. I didn't tell her, didn't tell anyone. The apartment resumed its cozy facade, but I saw it differently. Its corners sharper, its silence heavier. I wondered about its history. Had others heard this voice, felt this presence? My love for the paranormal sparked young, burned hotter. Now tempered by unease, I'd faced something, and whether it was spirit or shadow, it had marked me a memory I couldn't shake. I'm not the same kid anymore. I'm now 27 years old, so I'm starting to become a bit more of a skeptic, I guess you could say. Time dulls the edges, but not the core. It's just something that I'll never forget what I experienced that night, and I have trouble shaking it off as just a hallucination. The voice wasn't a dream, wasn't a neighbor's TV. It knew my thoughts, spoke them aloud, and stopped when I fought back. I'm curious to hear as to what you guys have to say, and any of your thoughts on these things. Have you had any similar experiences? And what do you think this all could have been? That night rewrote me. My curiosity about the paranormal, once fearless, now carried a caution. I'd chased stories of ghosts, but this was no story. It was mine, raw and unresolved. The apartment stayed in my mind, a place where the veil thinned. I never heard the voice again, never felt that presence, but I looked for it in every dark room, every quiet moment. My grandmother's home was still cozy, but I avoided the couch, sleeping closer to her room on later visits, my Game Boy left behind. I started researching, digging into paranormal lore. Some called it a thought form, a manifestation of my own mind turned against me. Others spoke of entities that feed on fear, echoing thoughts to unsettle. I found no answers, only questions. The internet held similar tales, voices in the night, words stolen from minds, but none matched the precision of mine. I wondered if the apartment held a history, a tenant who left more than memories. But my grandmother, practical and unyielding, had no stories, no hints of unrest. Skepticism grew with age, but it faltered against that night. I'd lie awake testing my thoughts, half expecting the whisper to return. It didn't, but its absence was loud. My family's own strange experiences, whispers, shadows in our old house, made me wonder if we carried a sensitivity, a beacon for the unseen. I kept quiet, guarding the story, afraid it'd sound like madness. But it wasn't. It was real as the couch, the Game Boy, the dark. I've changed how I move through the world. Dark rooms aren't just spaces, they're possibilities. I listen harder. Trust my gut, a lesson from that night. The paranormal isn't just a hobby. It's a lens, a way to see what others miss. I don't fear the dark, but I respect it. Knowing it can speak, that voice, whatever it was, taught me to fight, to question, to never assume I'm alone in the silence. The dark remembers. I carry that night like a stone, heavy, but precious. The whisper wasn't just sound. It was a mirror showing me my own mind, my own fear. I've grown, but I haven't outrun it. Every quiet moment, every shadowed corner holds a question. Was it real or was it me? I lean toward real, because skepticism can't erase the chill, the clarity, the way it stopped when I swung. I still love the paranormal, still chase its edges. But I'm careful now. That apartment, that couch, they're part of me, a chapter I revisit alone. I've asked others, friends' forums, if they've heard their thoughts spoken back. Some nod, eyes distant, but their stories differ, less vivid, less mine. I want to know, need to know what it was. A spirit, a trick of the mind, something else, older, hungrier. I'll never sleep on that couch again, but I'll keep searching. The voice is gone, but its echo lingers, a reminder that the world is bigger, stranger than I can grasp. It shaped me, made me listen, made me fight. Whatever it was, it chose me that night, and I met it, fist raised, heart racing, ready for whatever comes next. The touch of the unseen. The city streets were silent but not empty. Under the cover of night, Rowan, a delivery worker with autism, pulled his metal cart through the quiet, weaving through shadows cast by flickering streetlights. He thrived in the evening's calm, where the world's noise faded, leaving only his thoughts. He worked as a delivery person, delivering papers and ads, preferring the solitude of dusk. But tonight, something else walked with him, something that touched the living. The air was heavy, expectant. Rowan used a metal wagon cart to put the papers in its wheels, rattling softly as he moved. The streets were deserted, the nearest voices muffled across distant parking lots. A cold hand touched him on his right shoulder, like a corpse's grip, firm, but not crushing. It was a right hand impossible from behind his cart. It felt like a right hand, not icy cold, but as cold as a corpse. Rowan spun around, heart pounding. He looked around in confusion, thinking it was weird. No one was there, only shadows and silence. The touch lingered like a warning. The nearest people were across the parking lots. Rowan's mind raced his autism, amplifying every sensation, the chill, the weight of the unseen hand. He didn't see anyone or anything around him. Was it a prank, a spirit? He'd always been open to the paranormal, raised on stories of shadow people and lost souls. This felt real, too real. The first thing that happened was a cold hand, and it set his nerves alight. The night wasn't done with him yet. 2 minutes later, the world shifted again. On the same street, a restaurant with automatic doors stood at the corner. Its glass doors gleamed under a neon sign meant to open only within a meter or two. Rowan was walking 5 meters away from the door, and the door opened. He froze, peering inside. He didn't see anyone in the hallway, only the person at the register cleaning the counter. The air felt charged, as if something unseen had brushed past. He walked past, not thinking much of it. The second incident wasn't over. Rowan left his cart at the corner and crossed the street to deliver papers. He returned, grabbing another paper for the restaurant's mailbox. He went to put it in the mailbox and saw the door opening again from 7 meters away behind a pillar. No one could trigger the sensor from there. He walked around the pillar and felt something shoving or kicking his butt, a gentle but firm push that made him stumble. Rowan's breath hitched. He looked around, and there was no one there. The night was playing tricks, or something was. Rowan thought maybe it was those people in the parking lot, but they were far away. His heart raced, not with fear, but with unease, his senses overwhelmed. He wasn't scared as much as unnerved. The hand, the door, the push they connected. He called his mom and told her what was going on. Her voice steadied him as he walked the cart's rattle, a grounding rhythm. He continued his route, and everything was fine. But the city held one more secret. He moved into the next section without anything else happening and hung up. The third thing happened in the next section and completely freaked him out. A cul-de-sac dipped down a hill, its lamppost casting a weak glow. Rowan entered the first part of the street that goes down and put his cart down to deliver. Halfway down under the dim light, he saw it. A train of a dress flew by around the corner where he just came from. It wasn't a person running, just the fabric flowing like a specter's veil, untouched by the light. It wasn't an actual person because the light didn't get obstructed. Rowan's blood ran cold. He quickly finished the street, grabbed his cart, and stood under a lamppost where he felt safe. The dress's image burned in his mind, a ghostly glimpse, like a horror film's fleeting scare. He called his mom, almost hyperventilating. She was already on her way, sensing his fear from their last call. She said he sounded really scared. Rowan explained the dress, his voice shaking. He told her it wasn't necessary, he'd stay in the streetlights and do the unlit parts tomorrow. But she insisted. Rowan's mom came to him and finished the route with him. The cart rattled as they walked, her presence a shield. They were mostly done, so it wasn't too long. At home, they researched local hauntings. They looked some things up and tried a few things to protect him. Rowan donned his crystal bracelets, a ritual from his childhood. He's wearing his crystal bracelets again and won't take them off for a week. The hand, the door, the dress, were they warnings or something darker? He thinks the first two incidents are related. Maybe a warning for the push. The third thing, he just doesn't know. It freaked him out. Rowan's autism made the memories sharper, each sensation etched into his mind. He's freaked out and anxious about the whole thing. He stopped his evening deliveries, switching to daylight hours. He won't be doing his work during the evening anymore. The city's quiet streets, once his refuge, now felt like a stage for the unseen. He wonders if they're related or just paranormal occurrences in 30 minutes. Rowan's mother suggested a cleansing ritual, but he hesitated. What if it stirred something worse? He scoured local records, finding whispers of a woman who'd vanished near the cul-de-sac decades ago, her dress described in old reports. Was she the one touching him, pushing him, running past Rowan's sensitivity to the paranormal honed since childhood told him she was real? He wore his crystals, their weight a comfort, but sleep was elusive. The restaurant's doors, the cold hand. They felt like her reaching out, desperate for attention. Weeks later, Rowan shared his story with a coworker who mentioned a similar encounter, a fleeting figure near the same street. The city held secrets, and Rowan was no longer alone in seeing them. He avoided the cul-de-sac, sticking to well-lit routes. His mother's prayers echoed in his mind, a shield against the unknown. The dress, the touch, the push. They lingered, a reminder that some nights belong to the unseen. Rowan vowed to listen, to stay vigilant, for whatever walked those streets was still out there. The liftman's shadow. The retirement home was a labyrinth of echoes, its century-old walls whispering secrets. My first job out of high school, fresh and naive, landed me in the kitchen, surrounded by the clatter of pots and the stench of overcooked stew. But at night, when the residents slept, the building came alive. The air grew thick, as if the past was pressing in, watching from the shadows. Was it the creak of old wood or something else guiding my steps? Then the service elevator groaned, its doors sliding open without a touch, and I knew I wasn't alone. So my first job out of high school was a retirement home. My job was in the kitchen. It was my job to do a lot of the grunt work, I guess you could say. This is why I was hired. I hauled trash, pushed food carts to the floors, and scrubbed tables until my hands ached. All the trash, food carts to the floors for the residents, bust the tables, etc. The facility was ancient. Its 4 buildings, primary residence, 2 dormitories, and a maintenance shed etched with history. The old facility had 4 buildings and was built more than a century ago. The primary residence, the 2 dormitories, and a maintenance building for the workers. It was once a hospital for tuberculosis patients, a place where death lingered. This facility, if memory shows me correct, was originally created to house tuberculosis patients. The maintenance building and the primary residence were the only ones with power. The dormitories had been shut down over the past decade or two. Tuberculosis was cured. The dormitories gutted, and dark stood like forgotten tombs. No electricity, not even a light bulb. Now this next part, I'm unsure of, but as the maintenance personnel in my source, I really had no reason not to believe them, as it was logical, and what they said is that in time, the dormant saint were gutted. There was no electricity supplied to the buildings, not even a light bulb. For months, I saw nothing unusual, just the grind of work. Months would go by and not see anything, or even think that I may have, but sometimes hauling trash at night, I'd catch a flicker, a shadow darting across a dormitory window. But when I did, it would be something out of the corner of my eye that made you sort of do a double take, all in the garbage out at night. I could see a dark figure moving across window panes here and there, and on another night, somewhere else. Since it didn't repeat immediately, I just sort of dismissed it, I guess. I'd blink, and the figure was gone. Maybe a trick of the moonlight. Sometimes you think, see a resident on the grounds, only to do another take, realizing that they aren't there. I chalked it up to fatigue until the elevator changed everything. After being there for nearly a year, a weird thing started happening though, the elevator next to the kitchen. A service elevator used by the employees started moving on its own. It was a relic, loud and slow, its gears grinding like bones. It was a cranky, slow, and loud beast, not obsolete, but definitely the original one when it was built. It was my job to take the dining carts to the floors from the kitchen for the residents that had food brought to them. I'd push the heavy carts laden with trays to the service elevator. At first, it sort of started randomly, too. I'd pull the cart up the elevator, and the door would just open. It wasn't supposed to do that without a button press. Okay, it's really not supposed to do that unless you hit the button. I shrugged it off, assuming someone had called it. In time, it would do more as well. Not all the time, it was sort of completely random, really. I'd select a floor, but sometimes the elevator seemed to choose for me. I would still hit the floor. I would be going to, not thinking paranormal. Someone must have just pressed the elevator button, calling it to their floor, but doubt crept in. It was one of these tries at my dull-witted mind noticed something, though. If someone called the elevator, and I went to the second floor with no interruption, and no one got into the elevator from the second floor, why didn't it go to the third or fourth floor before allowing me to return to the base floor, the one floor below, floor 1? I tested it. One night pushing a cart to the third floor. It took some weeks before I got the opportunity to try what I was thinking. And it happened one night, taking a cart to the third floor. The elevator opened as I approached it. I stepped in, didn't touch a button, and the doors closed. I pulled the cart in and decided not to hit a button. The doors closed and off the elevator went. It stopped at the third floor empty. Did someone summon the elevator? Lo and behold, the elevator got to the third floor. No one was there. I pushed the dining cart out, returning to the elevator. The elevator started moving again and returned me to the base floor. I stood stunned. Did that just really happen? No, that's impossible. Weeks later, it happened again, this time to the second floor, exactly where I needed to be. In time, I got my chance to replicate this. Not long after that time, I just explained it happened exactly how the other one did. Except this time, the second floor. Exactly the place that I needed to be, and returned me to the base floor. For 5 months, it became routine. Over the next 5 months, it happened so often that I actually came to expect my lift man was going to ferry me up and down. I'd whisper thanks to the lift man, half joking, half believing. I did thank him from time to time, whether I was making a delivery or returning to collect the dining cart. It just happened, but I made a mistake. Did he do it all the time? Well, no, but enough to expect it, and well, I messed up. I brought it up to a coworker that the elevator was doing this. I told a coworker, and the elevator stopped its tricks. This apparently wasn't a good thing to do, divulging this was happening because the lift man stopped lifting for me. After this, I guess he didn't like his little secret being altered. It never happened again like ever after this. The lift man was gone, but the dormitory windows began to speak. One of the joyless jobs was taking the trash out, like I said earlier. A big bin across ice on an uneven sidewalk, covered in more ice through the courtyard all by yourself, is not a good time. One night, a light flared in a third-floor dormitory room, long abandoned. It was right in the corner of my eye, though. A light come on in the dormitory, and I looked, and there was a shadow man hanging by the neck from the ceiling in one of the dorm rooms on the third floor. I saw him sway a little to the left, and then to the right, and then suddenly the light went out again. The figure, dark and featureless, dangled its silhouette, burned into my mind. I wasn't terribly frightened, I guess, but definitely had the heebie-jeebies crawl up my spine. I hurried back inside, heart racing. I was in the "what the heck did I just see" category. But let's just say the emptying of the trash and getting back inside was definitely top priority after that. It happened again twice more. It was the first time that I saw a light come on, but it definitely wasn't the last that room lit up on 3 separate occasions. In fact, the second time there was nothing. The third was a shadow looking at the window. The third time, a seated shadow peered out, half hidden. The kind of looking where they hide from the bottom of the window still suggested that they were seated. I wasn't alone. I wasn't the only one to see the hanging man, too. A coworker came in one evening, freaking out with tears, saying that they saw someone hanging in one of the rooms. I kept quiet, not wanting to stir whatever haunted this place. I decided to keep my mouth shut over my time. There are shadows in that dormitory. This was the dorm with the morgue that I learned later, or was told later, would be seen more directly than the corner of your eye. The dormitory, once a morgue, held something heavier than shadows. I personally never saw anything in the dorm, but one of the maintenance men refused to go in there at all. He'd done sweeps for squatters, but swore he'd never return. They do sweeps to check the buildings for squatters, and I overheard him talking to a coworker that he was never going in there again. That place wasn't right. I started asking questions discreetly. An old janitor who'd worked there for decades told me the dormitory had been the worst part of the hospital. Patients who didn't make it were stored there sometimes for coups before burial. Some nurses, he said, claimed they heard whispers from the morgue even after it was sealed. Was the hanging man one of them trapped in his final moment? I dug into the facility's history, finding records of a worker, a groundskeeper, who'd taken his life in the dormitory in the 1930s. Despondent after losing his family. His name was Thomas, and he'd worked the elevators before they were electric. The lift man, I realized, might have been him. I tested the elevator again late one night alone. I stood inside, cart at my side, and whispered, "Thomas, you there?" The doors closed, and the elevator lurched upward, stopping at the 3rd floor. No one was there, but the air was cold, heavy. I never spoke his name again. Was he helping me or warning me? The dormitory sightings grew worse. Lights flickered in other rooms, and once I saw a shadow cross the courtyard. Too tall, too thin to be human. It didn't walk, it glided. I left the job. Not long after. The maintenance man's refusal to enter the dormitory stuck with me. I met him years later at a bar in town. He was retired, his hands still calloused from years of work. I asked about the dormitory. He stared into his drink, then said, "You saw it too, didn't you?" The hanging man. He'd seen it years before in the same room, and heard footsteps in the morgue. Footsteps that stopped when he turned. He said the place was cursed, built on sorrow. He never went back. Now I avoid old buildings. The retirement home is still there, though I hear it's being renovated. I wonder if the new workers feel it. The weight, the cold, the eyes in the dark. Did Thomas ever find peace? Or is he still ferrying carts waiting for someone to say his name? I've read about haunted hospitals, about spirits tied to places of pain. But the dormitory, with its morgue and its shadows, holds something older, something that doesn't rest. I keep my thanks to myself now, but I'll never forget the lift man's shadow swaying in the light that shouldn't have been. The empty wheelchair, the hospital's 3rd floor, was a labyrinth of silence, its sterile halls swallowing sound. Ethan, a young orderly, pushed a dining cart from the elevator, the wheels squeaking against the linoleum. The air was heavy, laced with antiseptic, and something older, something that clung to the walls. I got off the elevator on the 3rd floor with a dining cart. In the dim light, a figure caught his eye. An old woman, frail as a bird, hunched in a wheelchair. Her presence felt wrong, like a shadow cast without a source watching him from the edge of the corridor. She was ancient, her skin like parchment, her hospital gown dotted with tiny flowers. I recall seeing an old and frail woman. She was easily in her 80s, sitting in a wheelchair chair and a hospital gown that had a sort of tiny floral print. Ethan paused the cart, rattling to a stop, when her voice cut through the quiet. "Excuse me, can you help me?" She asked, her words thin but clear. I heard her speak. "Excuse me, can you help me?" she said. Her eyes clouded, but Sharp locked onto his, pulling him closer. The hallway seemed to narrow, the fluorescent lights flickering as if unsure of their own glow. Ethan forced a smile, his heart uneasy. "Yes, ma'am. What's up?" he replied, stepping toward her. "Yes, ma'am. What's up?" I said. "I need to get to my room," she said, her voice trembling with age. "I need to get to my room. Can you get me in there?" she replied. He moved behind the wheelchair, gripping the handles, and asked where her room was. The chair felt heavy unnaturally, so as if it carried more than her fragile frame. He pushed forward, each step a struggle, the wheels resisting as if caught in invisible mud. The corridor stretched endlessly, though they moved only a few feet. I recall the weight that I was pushing felt heavy on me for such a frail woman. Ethan's arms strained, his mind racing. Why was it so hard to move her? She pointed to a door just across from the elevator, its light off the frame cracked and peeling. "Here it is," she said, her voice sudden and firm. Ethan frowned. The room was too close, the door barely opened, its darkness spilling into the hall. He hesitated, the weight of the chair pressing against his palms, as if it wanted to stay still. "Do you want me to push you inside?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Do you want me to push you inside?" I asked. "Oh no, this is fine. Thank you," she replied, her tone oddly formal. "Oh no, this is fine. Thank you." Ethan nodded, stepping back to the elevator, his fingers brushing the call button. He turned, glancing at her one last time, and froze. When I did, the chair was empty. The wheelchair stood alone, its floral gown crumpled on the seat. No trace of the woman who'd been there seconds before. Ethan's breath caught his eyes darting to the dark room, its door still ajar. The hallway was silent, the cart untouched, the air colder than before. He checked the room, finding only dust and an empty bed, its sheets undisturbed. The hospital logs showed no patient matching her description, no record of anyone on the third floor that night. A nurse, when asked, mentioned rumors of a woman who died decades ago, always seen near that room, always vanishing. Ethan avoided the third floor after that, but the weight of the chair lingered in his hands, a memory that refused to fade. Shadows in the unfinished house. Some shadows don't belong. At 17, life had taught me to expect the worst. I was accustomed to being in horrible situations, as all I had was my mother, and she could not hold down a job for long because she had her own issues to tackle. We drifted rootless from one roommate's house to another. As I grew up, we stayed in and out of roommates' houses. We never really had a place of our own to stay, except twice, I guess. But that didn't last long either. Stability was a stranger, and homelessness a familiar foe. When I was 18, we were led into a situation where we were going to be homeless again, and I was used to it at this point, as I had slept in the street more than I'd like to say. The day came when we had to leave our roommate's house. My mother found refuge with her boyfriend's trailer, but I was adrift. My mom was able to stay at her boyfriend's trailer. I had nowhere to go, as I had no friends at this point, as I halted my friendships because they were bad for my health and mental state, and overall were pretty toxic. I'd cut ties, choosing solitude over poison. My mom offered me to go with her, but I didn't want to, as I felt like getting between my mom and her boyfriend was kind of weird. The streets were harsh, but I knew them. Plus, I'm used to the street, and I didn't think it was that bad at that time. Dusk fell, and I was alone. Here we are, right? Get dropped off out of McDonald's and I eat some burgers before I go off into the streets once more. The meal was a brief comfort fuel for the night ahead. Eventually, the sun fled, and darkness was all that remained. I wandered, searching for a place to rest. I went into many places that night, trying to sleep, but none of them were working, because it was either too hot, or the lights were too bright, or the mosquitoes were biting me. Each spot rejected me, too exposed, too alive with pests. That's when I remember a house that I used to go into to chill in. The house was my last hope. This house was under construction and nearly finished, so the door was all shut and the windows were all settled, so there were no mosquitoes. It was a skeleton of a home, quiet, sealed a refuge from the world. I go through the back like always and make my way upstairs. The stairs creaked under my weight, the air heavy with dust. Eventually, I settle into the bathroom because there's less debris on the floor, so I lay there and I try to sleep. The tiles were cold, but clean, a small mercy. Eventually, I hear some sounds downstairs, but I didn't think too much of it. I figured it was the door that I came through swinging open and closed or something, but the night wasn't empty. I lay there restless, my phone's glow a tether to the past. After laying there for maybe an hour, I would guess I opened my phone and looked at some old photos of my life, thinking about how messed up it was, that I got to this point, and how I lost everything. Each image stung a gallery of what was gone. The noises were still happening this entire time, but I paid no mind to it. Then sleepless I moved. Eventually, for whatever reason, I get up and I go and sit down on the back porch because I just couldn't sleep. The porch was open, the night air cool. I'm messing around on my phone for maybe 5 minutes when it happens. A flicker of movement caught my eye, and the world froze. He was there watching. I see movement to my left from the back door that I just exited from. My head snapped up, heart thudding. I glance over and time itself just freezes. At first I think it's an illusion, but I was in fact wrong. A figure stood in the doorway, half hidden. I see a man shrouded in darkness peering past the wall inside to gaze at me. His left half of his figure was behind the wall entirely, and I could not see anything but his upper body at this point, almost like the man was trying not to let me see his full body, as it would make his presence known. He was a silhouette, black as the night featureless. The man was a pure black silhouette, and I couldn't make out any features at this point. I stared trapped in his gaze. After noticing him, I just sort of sat there and stared at him for what seemed like forever, but was probably a minute or two. My mind raced. It was he, like me, seeking shelter. I expected him to come outside and talk to me because I normally talk to a lot of homeless people, and I thought the man was just homeless. But he didn't move. He didn't come outside, though. In fact, he hadn't moved at all. He was weirdly as still as a statue. His stillness was unnatural, a predator's patience. He was very quiet, too. Maybe if I hadn't noticed him, he would have stared at me the entire time. I had to leave. Fear crept in, urging action. Eventually, after staring at him for some time, I got up and got on my bicycle and made my way out of the property. My legs moved on instinct, the bike a lifeline. As I'm walking out of the backyard, I peer into the window that is next to the door that I saw the man in. The moonlight revealed the man was still there. Only now he was watching me walk out of the property. His form sharpened under the moon's glow. I could tell as well, because the moonlight revealed the top of the man's head, and I saw his left eye gazing at me. He was a white male who was quite tall and had a jacket of some kind on. His eye was cold, unblinking, locked on me. I couldn't make out many details because he was still cloaked in darkness. I fled, but he stayed. After seeing this, I just moved a little faster out of there. The bike's wheels hummed, carrying me away. I got to the front of the house on the street and looked inside to see if I could see him again, but I couldn't. The house was dark, empty, or so it seemed. I got on my bicycle and waved goodbye to the house because I figured the man was still watching me. A small act of defiance, a claim to my courage. Then I just rode away. The night swallowed me, but sleep wouldn't come. For the rest of the night, I really couldn't sleep. I tried 2 different spots, but both were no luck. His gaze haunted me. This is pretty much where the story ends. I know I didn't have a crazy or a fight to the death or anything, but this actually happened, and it was very eerie and weird. The man's silence, his stillness, gnawed at me. I don't know what the man was doing in there. I assumed that he was just trying to sleep like I was, but I don't know. The way he was staring at me was very unnerving. What did he want? It makes me wonder too just how long the man was in that house for, and what would have happened if I actually fell asleep in that house. Would he have just stared at me while I was asleep, completely blinded to his presence? Or did he have other intentions? I'll never know, but the question lingers a shadow that follows me. The streets taught me to survive. That night reshaped me, sharpening my instincts. I guess I'll never really know, but these days I don't go into houses like that anymore at all. The memory of that man's eye glinting in the moonlight kept me cautious alert. Life didn't get easier, but I grew harder forged by necessity. After this experience over 4 years ago, I went to work at a warehouse in a small town that I'm from. A new chapter, a chance to rebuild. I decided to leave after my health started to get worse physically, and I was diagnosed with panic disorder and severe anxiety after the situation that I'm about to tell you. The warehouse was a lifeline. This changed the way that I developed friendships after that job. That's for certain. I was guarded, but open to connection. I started this job on April Fool's Day of 2018, which was odd to me, and I had no kind of high expectation of the job. All I wanted was to do my job, get paid, and go home, as I had 2 children at home, and many things that I could work on there. The work was straightforward. The pay decent. The job wasn't hard, and it made pretty good money for all the duties considered. So I really couldn't complain. I settled in second shift, my rhythm. I worked second shift for about 5 months and went to day shift. Then I met JF. While working on second shift, I kept to myself mostly, until one day I met someone from one of the lines after we struck up a conversation about gaming. JF was easy to talk to, a kindred spirit. For the sake of anonymity, we'll name him JF. Well, JF was a pretty good guy, and we had a lot of things in common. We bonded over shared passions. I went home that night, and he popped up as a suggested friend on Facebook again, another oddity. So I decided to add him. The coincidence felt like fate. When I did, we started talking more at work until he suggested that we should hang out, so we did pretty frequently, in fact. Friendship grew fast. We were friends for a month at this point, and one day he decided that he was going to introduce me to his partner. She seemed warm, welcoming. She seemed decent at first. Super nice, didn't seem to be a judgmental type, so I was cool with her. We hung out often, a trio bound by laughter. From then on, I would hang out with him when my kids were spending time with my mother. But cracks appeared. One time, we were talking at a restaurant, and he started to vent to me. Dude, she's such a so-and-so sometimes. The other day, I forgot to take the trash out, and she threatened to stab me if I didn't. I brushed it off, uncertain. I've never been in a relationship where someone's threatened me, but she's got good intentions, dude. His words unsettled me, but I doubted. When he said that to me, I was concerned, but of course we had only been friends for a month or so. I thought that maybe he was being morbid jokingly, so I sort of chuckled at him. He didn't laugh. He gave me a pretty serious look and said, "I'm not joking, she really did," and that obviously concerned me. The warning stuck a seed of unease in our growing bond, one I'd soon learn to heed. Trust can be a trap. JF's words lingered, a quiet alarm. Fast forward about 8 months, they still together, and we all hang out pretty regularly, forgetting the things that he told me. Life moved fast, and I let the concern fade. Then one day, we were all talking, and he seemed a little off that day, so I asked him what was wrong in front of her. He deflected, uneasy. He flashed a smirk and said, "Nothing, dude. I'm just a little tired." He didn't have his eyes on me, though. He had them on her when I asked that. His glance told me more than his words. Truth came later. When he went to work the next day, I asked him again, "Do you promise to keep this between us?" Of course I agreed. He was unraveling. He said that he was breaking up with her, and she apparently went a little bit crazy. The breakup had sparked something dark. He said that she grabbed her gun and pointed it at. Said, "If I can't have you, then no one will." My stomach dropped. He said that he diffused the situation and is trying to look for a way out. I offered refuge, unsure, but loyal. Not really knowing what to say, I just said, "You'll figure it out, man. If you need somewhere to go, then you can come and stay with me until you get her out of the house." The storm broke. Fast forward another year, he finally decided to leave her. When he did, she flipped out again. This time, he told her of a text, and she said that she was going to find him and kill him. JF was absent on vacation. He was actually out of work that day with a vacation day. He sent me a text that said, "Let me know if she comes over to work looking for me." The message chilled me, a warning I didn't fully grasp. That struck me as odd because I had no idea of the situation that was unfolding at that time. She appeared her presence a threat. She actually did come to our job as well, and she asked me where he was, and I said I have no idea. I thought he was with you, and you guys went out of town or something. She didn't linger. All she did was roll up her window and drive off. I alerted JF, fear rising. I called him, and I told him that she came by, and he called the police about it. They found her armed, a danger unmasked. They had found her up the road with a loaded gun in the car. The incident shook me, but it was only the beginning. 2 months later, he decided to talk to her again, and when he did, he had something to tell me. His call was urgent. When he called me, he asked if I had seen her around, and I hadn't. He said I would take some vacation days if I were you. Danger was closer than I knew. Dumbfounded, I asked him why, and he said to me because she's out of jail and her cousins are in town trying to find the people that she had personal vendettas with. You're one of them. Terror seized me. At that point, I was terrified. I grabbed my kids, and I immediately went out of town. I fled my children's safety, my only thought, the warehouse and JF's warning, a fading echo as I ran from a threat I barely understood. I ran, but the shadow followed. I took 2 weeks off of work, and I come to find out that the next day, her and her cousins went to the next town over and shot 3 people in an apartment and killed them. The news hit like a blow, their names familiar, their fates sealed. I got the news about it the day after it happened. JF's warning wasn't abstract. It was real deadly. The reason why he knew that they were coming after me is because they made a Facebook Messenger group that he was included in and sent a list of names. A digital death list dismissed as spam. Everybody regarded it as spam and decided to disregard the message, but he knew what it was. My name was on it. 3 of the names on that list were people that they shot. The 4th name on that list, well, it was mine. My blood ran cold, the weight of survival pressing down. After they found the evidence, and he decided to go public about the group and screenshots that he had, they were all charged with first-degree murder. Justice came, but too late for some. From then on, I was very careful about who I would stick my neck out for, because even though he knew the context of that list and her intentions, he decided not to inform anyone else on it. JF's silence. His delay broke my trust. Needless to say, we aren't friends anymore, and I dodged a bullet, literally. I rebuilt, but not unchanged. The warehouse job ended my health crumbling under panic and anxiety scars of a life too close to death. I learned to choose allies with care, to guard my circle fiercely. The streets had taught me resilience, but this taught me caution, a lesson written in blood. Years passed, and I carried the weight of survival, the knowledge that trust could be a blade. My children became my anchor, their safety, my purpose each day. A step away from the shadows that had hunted me, another shadow loomed years before. To start this, I feel like it needs a little bit of backstory. At the time, I was 12 years old, almost 13, and I was spending the day at my grandma's house. Her home was a beacon in a rough neighborhood, a place of warmth amid decay. Just to set the tone as well, my grandma lives in a not-so-good part of town. Her house is pretty much the highlight of that neighborhood. I was young, fearless, with my best friend Izzy by my side. That day, me and my best friend Izzy were taking a walk to go to the park that was in the area. The walk was routine, until it wasn't. This was common for us to do, and we were quite used to the walk to get there. From time to time, we would get creepy encounters, but nothing like this. We moved through familiar streets, the park our goal. As we were walking to the park, we passed this very old apartment complex. For reference, there's broken windows, tops all over. Tiki de taters were all the brick was breaking down, that sort of thing. It was a husk, lifeless until that day. We never really saw anyone outside of those apartments ever until that day. A couple middle-aged sat in lawn chairs, their presence a jolt in the desolate scene, a warning I didn't yet heed. Some smiles hide knives. There was an older couple, maybe mid to late 40s, sitting on the sidewalk in lawn chairs. They were strangers in a place that knew none. We haven't seen them around before, so immediately I took notice. Their presence was a crack in the ordinary, a signal I should have read. When the woman noticed me and my friend, she smiled and waved. The gesture seemed innocent enough, and being the nice person that I try to be, I smiled and waved back. Her smile was warm, but Izzy tensed beside me, her instincts sharper than mine. She called us back. We kept walking until she had said, "Hey, stop for a minute. I just want to talk to you. Where are you headed? Where you have to leave so quickly?" Her voice was honey, but it carried a hook. After she said that, my friend side-eyed her so hard and looked me dead in the face and said, "Let's go, I don't get good vibes from these people." Izzy's warning was clear, her unease a mirror to my growing doubt. I just shrugged and said, "Okay." So instead of answering her, we sort of slowly started continuing walking. We moved, but the air felt heavier, watched. She followed. We walked a little distance, not bothering to look back until I could sense the fact that we were being followed. My skin prickled a primal alert. So I turned around, and there she was, the same lady that we had just run into trailing us. Her pursuit was deliberate, her smile gone. Once she noticed that I had seen her, she began to wave us over, specifically me. Her focus was sharp, isolating, so I nudged my friend to show her what she was doing. We were obviously pretty creeped out by this. Izzy's eyes widened, her fear a spark to my own. We made a plan, flawed, but urgent. My friend told me to go and see what she wants, but stay somewhat close, and entertain her while she calls my grandma to come and pick us up from the area that we were in, as she was following us, and we no longer felt safe. It was a desperate move. Was this a good plan? No, but at the time, it seemed like it was. I handed Izzy my phone, my grandmother's number ready, so I hand her my phone open to my grandma's contact, while I head over to see what she wants, since she was specifically motioning for just me to come over. I approached, heart pounding, her smile a mask I couldn't trust. Her words were a trap. As I approached her, she started talking. "Why did you try to get away so fast? I really mean no harm. I just thought you little ladies were simply adorable, and I wanted to find out more, especially about you. Me and my husband have taken quite an interest in you." Her tone was soft, but her eyes were hungry. I don't remember exactly what was said, but it was along those lines. I remember that I was so taken aback by what she said, all I could do was sort of nod and stare. I stood frozen, her words wrapping around me like a net, pulling me into a danger I was only beginning to sense. She wanted more than words. Then she started asking me questions such as name, age, grade, school, etc. Obviously, I didn't give her any of my real information. Thank the Lord that I was smart enough to know that. My lies were my shield, each answer a step back from her grasp. Once she seemed satisfied with the answers that I gave her, she started speaking again. You know, you really are a darling little thing. Me and my husband can't have any more children, and the one baby that we did have, it died at only a few weeks because she was born early. She had the exact same bright blue eyes. Her story tugged at me a flicker of pity. I admittedly did feel bad for her, so I just said something along the lines of, "I'm sorry for your loss, but I have to be going now." Her mask slipped. That's when things got really weird though. She then said, "Now Angel, that's no way to talk to your mommy. Tell your friend. It's time to go home and come back inside with mommy and daddy." My blood froze her words, a twisted claim. At that point, I flipped the heck out and just turned around and started walking towards my friend with pleading eyes to help me out of this situation. Izzy was on the phone, her face pale, my anchor in the storm. She was still on the phone with my grandma, obviously, as this was only over the course of 5 or so minutes. She couldn't save me at that moment, but I just kept inching closer to her, trying to get away from this really weird lady. She wouldn't let go. That was until she grabbed me, like literally tugged my arm and pulled me into her, grabbed my jaw, and made me look her in the face, and then said, "Honey, enough of this. What's going on with you? Just come home with mommy and daddy. You're our little angel baby, and God's way of giving her back to us." Her grip was iron, her eyes wild with a delusion I couldn't fathom. I looked at her like she was crazy and managed to get out of her grip and finally stood up for myself. "Look, lady, I'm sorry for your loss, but I'm not in any way related to you, nor am I your child. So please just leave me alone." My voice shook, but it held. I fought free, but not alone. I said as assertively as possible given my terrified state. I again tried to walk away, and this time she grabbed me again harder and started walking back towards the apartment with me. Her strength was desperate, pulling me toward the unknown. At that point, my friend came running over and started trying to help me the best that she could from this crazy lady, since she was also only a 13-year-old girl. Izzy's courage matched mine, her hands tugging at me a lifeline. Then, by some miracle, my grandma finally pulled up, and that seemed to scare the lady away. We escaped. When I tell you we ran into the car, I can barely describe it accurately. We moved like lightning. The car was our sanctuary, my grandmother's presence a shield. My grandma asked what had happened, to which we told her, and she decided that she would inform the police. The story poured out fear and relief, tangled. They didn't end up doing much of anything, really, as we didn't know the names of these people, and all we could really give them was a description. The police searched, but found nothing. When they looked into the apartments and who all lived there, the couple did not actually live there, obviously. And the other people from the apartment have never seen them before, based on description. They were ghosts, or worse, predators, who vanished into the night. The fear didn't fade. This happened about 5 years ago now, and it still really scares me, and makes me wonder about what their intentions were. Was I almost kidnapped? Was she just really crazy? Am I overreacting? And was it just an innocent encounter, or was there something evil about to happen? The questions haunted me. Each possibility. A wait. Was it delusion, or something darker? I leaned toward danger, my instinct screaming what my mind couldn't prove. That day sharpened my caution, a lesson in trusting my gut, honed by years of surviving the streets. I carried the scars forward. The encounter with the couple wasn't my first brush with danger, nor my last, but it stood out a vivid mark on my memory. The man in the unfinished house. the threat of JF's partner. They were threads in a tapestry of survival, each teaching me to see the world's edges, to sense the shadows before they struck. My life, shaped by instability, had made me resilient, but these moments made me vigilant, a watcher in a world that didn't always watch back. The streets were my school. From the house under construction to the warehouse, I learned to navigate threats, to weigh trust against risk. The couple's words, their grip echoed in quieter moments, a reminder of how close I'd come to something I couldn't name. I stopped walking alone in rough areas, kept my phone closer, my senses sharper. My grandmother's house remained a haven, but I saw it differently, its safety fragile, its neighborhood a maze of hidden dangers. I rebuilt my circle carefully. Friendships became rare, chosen with precision. JF's betrayal, his silence when my life was at stake, taught me that loyalty isn't guaranteed, even from those you call friends. I surrounded myself with people like Izzy, whose instincts matched mine, whose courage held when mine wavered. My children, my mother, my grandmother, they were my core, my reason to keep moving, to keep surviving. No matter what the world threw at me, the paranormal lingered a quiet thread. My curiosity about the strange, sparked young, flickered in these moments. The man's stillness, the couple's delusion, were they just human? Or something else? I'd felt the world's oddities before, whispers of the unseen in my family's stories. But these were grounded, too real, too tied to human intent. Yet they carried an eeriness, a sense that the line between normal and other was thin, a line I'd crossed more than once, each time emerging stronger, wiser, ready for the next shadow. Survival is a teacher. The man in the house, the couple on the street, partner, they were lessons in a curriculum I didn't choose. Each left a mark, a reminder to trust my instincts, to see the world as it is, not as I wished it to be. The streets had been my home too long, their dangers as familiar as my own breath. But these encounters pushed me beyond survival, into a kind of clarity, a way of moving through life with eyes wide open. The house under construction was a turning point. Its emptiness had seemed safe, a refuge from the heat and mosquitoes. But it hid a watcher, a figure whose intent I'll never know. His gaze locked on me. Through the moonlight was a warning, a signal to never assume I'm alone. I stopped seeking shelter in unfinished places, choosing open spaces where I could see, where I could run. The bike my wave goodbye, it was defiance, a claim to my right to exist, to move forward despite the fear. JF's story was a betrayal. His silence, knowing my name was on that list, cut deeper than the threat itself. I'd offered him a home, a way out, but he held back, risking my life for reasons I'll never understand. The warehouse, once a step toward stability, became a reminder of how trust can falter, how even friends can fail. I left it behind, my health fraying, but my resolve hardening. My children needed me, and I needed to be someone who could protect them, who could see danger before it struck. The couple was a nightmare. Their words, their hands, their claim to me as their own. It was a violation, a theft of safety I hadn't known I needed. Izzy's courage. My grandmother's arrival, they saved me, but the fear stayed a shadow that colored every walk, every stranger's glance. I learned to read people, to sense the shift from kind to cunning. The police's failure. The couple's disappearance only deepened my reliance on myself, on my ability to act, to escape, to survive. I grew through the fear. These moments, strung together, built a version of me that could face the world's worst and keep going. My mother's struggles, my own battles, they forged a strength I didn't always see, but felt in every choice, every step away from danger. The paranormal. The strange remained a quiet hum in my life, a curiosity I'd chase in safer ways through stories, not risks. But these encounters were human-grounded, and that made them scarier, more real, a testament to the dangers we face when we least expect them. Danger wears many faces. The man's silhouette, the couple's delusion, JF's partner's gun. They were different, but the same, each. A reminder that safety is fleeting, that trust is a gamble. I'd lived on the edge too long, my childhood a patchwork of borrowed homes and open streets. But these moments stood out vivid against the blur of survival. They taught me to listen to the quiet warnings, the prickle on my skin, the voice that says one before the mind catches up. The house was a lesson in solitude. I'd thought it empty, a place to rest, but it held a presence I couldn't explain. His stillness, his hidden form. It was a puzzle one. I solved by leaving, by choosing motion over curiosity. I'd met others on the streets, shared stories. But this man was different. His silence, a threat I couldn't name. I wondered later if he was lost like me or something else, a figure drawn to the unfinished, the abandoned. But his eye glinting in the dark told me to keep moving, to never linger where shadows gather. JF's world was a maze. His friendship, so easy at first, became a trap I didn't see until it was nearly too late. The warehouse, the games we loved. They were a bridge, but one that led to danger. His partner's rage, her gun, her list. It was a storm I escaped by chance, by the grace of JF's late warning. I'd trusted him, opened my life, but his silence was a betrayal, a reminder that even allies can falter. I rebuilt, choosing solitude over risk. My children's laughter, my guide. Their safety, the couple was a wound. Their words, their hands, they tore at something deeper, a sense of safety I'd clung to despite the streets. Izzy's quick thinking, my grandmother's car. They were lifelines pulling me back from an edge I hadn't seen. The police's failure, the couple's absence, it left me with questions, not answers. Were they grieving, mad, or predatory? I leaned toward the last, their grip, too sure, their words too possessive. I stopped waving at strangers, stopped trusting smiles, a lesson carved in fear. I am my own protector. These moments, these shadows built a woman who walks with purpose, who sees the world's teeth before they bite. My paranormal curiosity sparked young hums beneath it all, a quiet wonder at the strange. But these were human dangers, real and raw. They taught me to trust myself, to act when others hesitate, to survive when the world offers no mercy. My life, my children, they're mine to guard, and I do with every breath, every wary glance. The past is a map. Each encounter, the man. The couple, JF's partner, plotted a point on my journey, a guide to navigating a world that doesn't forgive mistakes. The streets, the warehouse, the rough neighborhood. They were my proving grounds, where I learned to stand, to run, to fight. I carry them all, not as burdens, but as armor. Each scar, a lesson, each fear, a teacher. I'm not the girl who lay in that bathroom, who waved at that couple who trusted JF. I'm stronger, sharper, alive, because I chose to be. The house taught me vigilance. Its quiet, its shadows, hid a danger I felt before I saw. That man, his eye like a blade in the moonlight, was a warning to never assume safety, to always have an exit. I stopped seeking refuge in half-built places, choosing spots where I could see the sky, where I could move. The bike, my wave, it was a declaration, a refusal to be prey. I'd survived the streets before, but this was different. A moment where instinct outran reason, saving me from what might have been. JF's betrayal cut deep. His friendship was a light in a dark time, but it led to a darkness I hadn't foreseen. The warehouse, the shared laughs. They were real but fragile, shattered by his silence, when my life hung in the balance. His partner's gun. Her list, it was a near miss. A reminder that trust is a risk, that even friends can fail. I left the job, my health fraying. But my purpose, clear. Protect my children. Build a life where danger can't reach. I choose allies now with care. Their loyalty proven before I open my heart. The couple was a theft. Their claim their hands. They stole a piece of my innocence, a belief that kindness is always kind. Izzy's courage. My grandmother's arrival, they gave it back, but not unchanged. I see strangers differently now. Their smiles suspect their words a potential lure. The police's failure, the couple's vanishing. It taught me to rely on myself to act when others falter. I walk with purpose, my eyes scanning my instincts, my guide a lesson born in that moment of fear. I am more than my fears. The paranormal. The strange, it's a thread in my life. A curiosity I'll always chase. But these were human threats grounded in intent, in choice. They shaped me, but they don't define me. My children, my mother, my grandmother, they're my why. My reason to keep going, to build a life where shadows can't reach. I'm a survivor, not because I had to be, but because I chose to be each step a victory, each day a defiance of the dark. Shadows don't own me. The man in the house, the couple JF's partner, they were moments, not my life. They scared me, scarred me, but they didn't break me. I've walked streets, faced threats, and come out standing, each encounter a stone in the foundation of who I am. The world is harsh, but I'm harsher, forged by necessity, tempered by fear. My curiosity about the strange, my love for the paranormal. It's a spark that burns still. But these were human dangers, real and raw, teaching me to see, to act, to live. The house was a mirror. It showed me my own vulnerability, lying in that bathroom thinking I was alone. The man's gaze, his stillness. It was a challenge, one I met by leaving, by choosing life over curiosity. I don't linger in empty places anymore. Don't trust the quiet. The bike, the wave, they were my rebellion, my refusal to be defined by fear. I'd survived worse, but this was a reminder the world watches, and I must watch back, always ready, always moving. JF's world was a lesson in trust. His friendship was a gift, but one laced with risk. The warehouse, our shared moments, they were real, but not enough to outweigh his silence when my life was at stake. His partner's rage, her gun. It was a storm I escaped by luck, by the thin thread of his late warning. I left the job, my health a casualty, but my resolve intact. My children are my North Star, their safety my vow, and I choose who stands beside me with care. Their loyalty earned, not assumed. The couple was a violation. Their words, their hands. They tried to claim me, to rewrite my story. Izzy's bravery, my grandmother's car, they were my salvation, pulling me from a nightmare I didn't fully grasp. The police's inaction, the couple's absence. It taught me to be my own shield, to trust my instincts over authority. I don't wave at strangers anymore. Don't linger in their smiles. I walk with purpose, my eyes sharp, my heart guarded, a lesson carved in that moment of terror. I am my own light. The paranormal. The strange, it's a hum in my life. A curiosity I'll chase in safer ways, through stories, not risks. These encounters were human. Their danger rooted in choice and intent. They shaped me, but I shaped my future. Building a life where my children know safety, where my mother's struggles don't define us. I'm a survivor, a fighter, a woman who sees the shadows and walks through them, head high, heart fierce, ready for whatever comes next. The shadows taught me to shine. The man, the couple JF's partner. They were tests, and I passed. Each moment, each fear, built a woman who doesn't just survive, but thrives. Was I almost kidnapped? Was she just really crazy? Am I overreacting? Or was there something evil about to happen? I'll never know. But I know this. I'm here, standing because I trusted my gut, because I fought, because I ran. The streets, the warehouse, the rough streets, they're my past, but not my future. I choose my path. The house, the list, the couple's grip. They're memories, not chains. I carry them, but they don't carry me. My children, my family, they're my why. My reason to build a life where shadows can't touch us. The paranormal. The strange. It's a spark. I'll always hold, but these were human dangers, and I met them head on. Each time emerging stronger. I don't fear the dark anymore. I know it, respect it, and walk through it. My eyes open, my heart unbroken. I am enough. The man's gaze, the couple's hands, the list with my name. They tried to dim me, but they failed. I'm a survivor, a mother, a fighter, shaped by the shadows, but lit from within. I'll keep moving, keep loving, keep chasing the strange and the safe, because I've faced the worst and come out whole, ready for the world's next challenge. My children's hands in mine, my future bright.